The story begins its fascinating narrative. The description introduces readers to the magic tower in the form of a mixture of various items. So, for example, at the very top there was a blue fire that hovered over a rather large barrel, around which vines of golden plants were tied. Above them was the silhouette of a man. Apparently, he was watching something using his phone, because it was possible to trace how a bright blue light enveloped his face. At the very bottom of the tower there were chains, chests with mysterious drawings, and stone structures that glowed with different colors. In the new episode, the picture allows viewers to see the character a little closer, and indeed he was looking at the screen of his phone. The man had a sharp nose and chin. His forehead was covered with slightly overgrown bangs. However, at the moment, it was difficult to see his face. Suddenly, the narrative asks a question, probably to the readers. He was interested when someone was reading webtoons, and the next moment he made the assumption that he was in a forgotten transport early in the morning. Apparently, a subway car appeared in front of the audience, in which there were people going about their business. Someone was chatting with friends. Others were looking at their phones, or during short retreats during the day. But regarding the following judgment, after him, a sinister smile appeared on the new episode from ear to ear, which revealed a view of dazzling white teeth. The story once again draws readers' attention to a tall tower of mysterious objects of various shapes and sizes. As it turned out, the action was conducted around a heavenly castle called a terrarium, which was closed from all sides by the sea and a large shore. It was so high that it reached the clouds. The painting described that the castle had dark brown walls with lots of windows. And then two characters appeared in the background. The first wore a red robe with a brown cloak. On his belt behind his back hung a cold weapon, to which a man with blonde hair was pulling a hand in a red glove. And the second one, standing in front of the first one, was wearing white and blue equipment. He had long white hair that fluttered in the wind. Apparently, they were rivals. Readers could guess based on the fact that they were directed against each other and were in the big arena. It became known in the next episode that the first man named Dean belonged to the swordsman class and belonged to the second rank. And the second character turned out to be a girl at all. Her name was Nagi, and she was also considered a swordsman, but the rank was first. Mentally, the hero thought that they had finally managed to meet, when suddenly the guy rushed to run in the direction of the lady, raising huge clouds of smoke and dust after him. That's just the girl continued to stand quietly and watch her opponent. When he managed to get close to her after a short period of time, he struck her using a sword with a rather large blade. However, readers may have noticed how she pulled her hand away. With this maneuver, she managed to save time to form a magical stream of golden-colored energy, which a moment later was already flying into Dean. It had the appearance of a flame. That's just that he managed to react correctly and reflect the blow. Both characters pointed their hands at each other, preparing for a counterattack. Nagi used a new push. Blue energy charges flew towards her opponent, which the guy perfectly skirted. In the next episode, he mentally exclaimed that he had managed to touch his cold weapons to an opponent whose eyes were burning scarlet. Nagi only said the words flaming sword out loud. Apparently, it was a spell, because a second later a huge stream of golden energy flew into the man. Suddenly, the space seemed to disappear, taking on the appearance of blue and white pixels. Then the image disappeared altogether. It became known to readers that all this time the two characters were not real. The story describes how they both appeared on the screen of some smartphone held by a guy with black hair while on the bus at the same time. He thought in his head that he was being mocked. The reason was that the stranger read it because he was told that it would be interesting, but only uploaded one chapter, which contained complete nonsense. The next episode shows how the guy started typing something. He came to the conclusion that the plot in which the main character of Manhwa lost to the strong, it was not curious. Before the eyes of readers, comments appeared in this Asian comic, which turned out to be far from rosy. Then the story allowed us to see the one belonging to a stranger. He wrote that if this becomes the best comment, whether with a flaming sword or not, then he will have to deal with a fool. Suddenly, the action describes how some silhouette was looking at him and laughed, because such childish behavior seemed funny to him. The stranger leaned on his left hand, and in his right hand he held a phone, the light of which shone in his face. This character pulled a smile and said out loud that leaving such a comment was too self-confident gesture. And then he said that if he was so guaranteed to be truthful, then he would like to try something. An index finger reached out to the smartphone screen. As it turned out, he left a like. The guy who wrote the comment thought that it was a good start. But when he read that the plot revealed the development of the main character more, he asked himself what this stranger was carrying for the absurdity, referring to the fact that it was a ridiculous explanation. because he blamed everything on disclosure. The character with black hair pulled a smile from ear to ear and began to follow the development of events, at the same time thinking about the fact that wasn't it a webtoon that should have been read for relaxation. Suddenly someone interrupted him. The guy was approached, asking him to move the bag. From such an unexpected action, the character's eyes widened, as if he was scared because of something. As it turned out, it was a girl with short dark hair and big green eyes. She was dressed in a school uniform, as readers might assume, with a bomber jacket over it. The guy stared at her with a questioning expression on his face. The story focused on his backpack, which was lying in a nearby place from a schoolboy holding a phone in his hands. In the next episode, it became known that the heroine's name was Yun Hiso. She closed her left eye, as if winking at him, and then sat down next to him. The girl put away her pink backpack, hanging it on her chest, and took out her smartphone. As it might seem, the student was worried about the unexpected appearance of the heroine, because you could see how beads of sweat appeared on his face, and his lips trembled from an unfamiliar feeling. He was embarrassed, although, in fact, he himself understood it. That's just the guy was wondering if he needed to pretend that he didn't know the girl. The character glanced at her. In the next episode, the situation became clearer to some extent. Yun Hiso was his classmate. The guy and she were not close at all, but the heroine still sat next to him. As it turned out, the girl was quite popular in their class, but nothing connected her with the narrator, despite the fact that she was constantly surrounded by people. The guy asked himself a question, according to which he was trying to find the reasons for this behavior. In the next episode, the narration tells readers about how Yun Hiso handed her classmate banned substances. That was the reason. Such unexpected behavior on the part of the girl somewhat puzzled the guy. He bent his back. Drops of sweat appeared on his face. The character asked her a question. He wondered why she was doing this, and she, in turn, argued that her homeroom teacher had called her, so the heroine asked him to hold the banned substances for a while, and then return them on the lunch break. The student was silent for a couple of seconds because he did not know how to react to this situation correctly. He wondered why Yun Hiso had chosen him. She replied, referring to the fact that they were friends. Her words made the main character blush, but the story changed the topic to the number of reactions typed under the guy's comments. Now there were 20 of them. The action takes place on the territory of a school built of white brick. The classroom was in chaos. The desks were arranged in a chaotic order, as if a herd of horses had just walked. There were notebooks and other supplies on them. Chairs were displayed in the aisles. Someone was sleeping with his head on the table. Others were chatting, making a noise, which only made the crowd rage more. The main character is mired in his thoughts. It became known that he still took the banned substances that Yun Hiso had given him, except now he had no idea what he had to do. At some point, it seemed to him that the girl was too worried, so she could just keep them with her. In any case, why did the high school student need them? The guy turned his head over his right shoulder and looked back. Someone in the crowd shouted the incantation Flaming Sword. He was told to stop the character. The main character reflected that the third place from the entrance was occupied by his classmate, who at that moment was bursting with laughter. There were other characters of their class around her. The girl was holding a phone in her left hand and talking to her friends. The student decided to give her banned substances at lunch because there was very little left. Moreover, his attention was attracted by the recurring spell Flaming Sword. However, some guy laughed about it. His strange reaction was picked up by others. Another character asked the stranger if she had read the webtoons, adding that the last chapter was fiery. However, she answered him, asking for a chance to explain herself. Suddenly, someone entered into a dialogue with this group of guys, asking a question. He was interested in the fact whether they were talking about the player. As it turned out, it was the main character. The guy came up to them and said that he had seen him too. That's just such a sudden appearance to some extent puzzled the others. You could see surprise on their faces. Then he supplemented his answer by saying that the flaming sword they were talking about appeared in the last chapter. Readers could notice that the main character was very interested, which could not be said about the group of guys. The student wanted to express his point of view about the fact that the author was going to do something, but he was interrupted by a guy with square-rimmed glasses, who let him know that he had no idea. The next episode described how the main character began to get nervous. A dark aura formed around him. He twisted his face, making an assumption as to why there was such a cold reaction. It seemed to him that the students were not talking about webtoons. Then he was no longer interested in this fact. He looked at the group of guys surrounding Yun Hiso. The point was that he had cut in, even though he wasn't even close to any of them. After a short period of time, the guy pulled a smile from ear to ear, revealing a view of his brilliantly white teeth, and asked for forgiveness for interrupting them so unexpectedly. His face turned red with worry and embarrassment. Yunhiso entered into the dialogue, around which a dark, disgusting energy was formed. She asked the question out loud. As it turned out, she was interested in whether the main character was the loser of their class. Such a terrible reaction puzzled the guy. His eyes widened to a huge size. Then the schoolboy, who looked like a bully, asked his friend with glasses if he had communicated with Ho Saljin, to which he gave a negative answer. The next moment, he asked the same question to the girl standing next to him. She also said that not really, and in the next episode, he asked, making the assumption that it was Yunhiso. The schoolboy glanced at the sitting heroine and began to listen attentively to her. The girl also gave a negative reaction. Why did the main character fall into prostration at all? She didn't know him. No one else paid attention to Ho Saljin. He lowered his head and thought about something. There was talk around him that a group of guys were going to eat, saying that they were giving rice prosecutors today. That's just the speaker was asked what it is. As it turned out, this was the complete opposite of some rice thieves. Suddenly, a stranger grabbed the main character by the right shoulder, making the assumption that the students did not read the webtoons. This touch made Ho Saljin come alive. A yellow-haired hero appeared behind him. He said out loud that he read them every week, hanging on to his classmate. According to the guy's thoughts, it was Kim Taewon. They were noticed by school children who deliberately ignored the so-called loser. Someone from the class was surprised that Kim Taewon was also an otaku, which gave him goosebumps. A question was heard, according to which someone had just spoken about a flaming sword. And in response, a suspicion appeared. Did he really ask for the simple and obvious reason that he did not know? The action is focused on Ho Saljin, who began to gradually move away from all this turmoil. But as for Kim Taewon, he turned his head over his left shoulder and cast his gaze somewhere to the side. There was a dark aura around him, as if he was plotting something terrible. At this very moment, the silhouette of a mysterious character appeared, whose eyes were covered with a black object. He was in some kind of blue space and was smiling. And the comment of the main character still continued to gain positive reactions, which now numbered 46. It was warm outside. The story tells how some school children played ball in the yard. As it turned out, it was a physical education lesson. After all, Ho Saljin was wearing a sports uniform, and apparently he didn't like it. Moreover, he felt ashamed, and therefore decided to stand aside for a while. The main character lowered his head and continued to lead a chain of reflections. For him, it was not surprising that Yunhiso lied, because what could she do? It would not be a plus for her. However, whatever prohibited substances would not affect him, now it concerned him. When suddenly a guy who looked like a bully turned over his right shoulder, addressing Subai and shouting at the top of his voice that the ball was flying to the side, so it was necessary to cover. At that moment, Ho Saljin noticed the object heading towards him, which alerted him to some extent, because the ball was flying at such a fast speed that it provoked the appearance of a wind flow. The episode showed a close-up of the real reaction of the main character, who clenched his jaw and thought to himself that now this game product was spoiling his mood. He was really angry because you could see the vessels on his face that were strained. There was a fire of anger in his eyes. The schoolboy made a swinging motion to deflect the ball, but he missed, and it just rolled away behind his back, hitting Kim Taewon's goal. The winning team exclaimed joyfully that the loser owed them ice cream. The guys stood silently and drooped because of the goal. At this moment, the main character was very nervous because the ball he missed really hit. Large drops of sweat were rolling down his face, when suddenly he was interrupted. Someone cursed and asked a question to Ho Saljin, referring to the fact that he did it on purpose. But the guy apologized with a scared look because he really wanted to cover up. But, as it turned out, this remark was dedicated not to him, but to Kim Taewon. A schoolboy with dark hair from Yunhiso's group was addressing a blonde guy, and when he passed by the main character, he started running, wondering how he failed to block such a blow. He exclaimed with disdain that the winning team demanded ice cream from them. However, Kim Taewon argued that he was distracted by the webtoon, what greatly puzzled his comrades. The guy was too interested, and his classmates, a schoolboy with square-shaped glasses and a bully, made it clear to him that he should wait at least a half before reading his favorite player, because now he was crossing all boundaries. The main character was somewhat puzzled. At that moment, his comment got 67 positive reactions. In the next episode, the story describes to readers how Ho Saljin got rid of banned substances and watched the webtoon, at the same time coming to the conclusion that he did not give him any pleasure at all. He wondered how Kim Taewon could even be distracted by this. The main character felt ashamed when he remembered how he missed the ball. Suddenly, someone was talking. Someone was sorry. His interlocutor was curious about what the reason was, making the assumption that it was the ice cream. Except it wasn't. Ho Seoljin recognized those voices. They belonged to his classmates. A guy with a sharp nose and black hair turned to Kim Taewon and with a funny expression on his face offered to tell the teacher that he had not handed over his phone. At that moment, the main character thought that physical education had already ended. But he did not want to go out. The next moment, a schoolboy who looked like a bully began to conduct a dialogue about the intervention of Ho Seoljin. When he heard about it, he became surprised at the moment, rather even scared. Someone picked up his remark, referring to the fact that the guy had entered into a conversation, which greatly annoyed them. And as it turned out, the main character always did. Suddenly, a schoolboy with glasses from Yoon Hee-so's group called out to Kim Taewon, saying that the guy was always covering for this Ho Seoljin, and even today he did the same. A guy with black hair hung on the shoulder of the blonde man, who asked him a question, wondering if he didn't know that the guys went to high school together. Then his interlocutor made the assumption that they were close, but he was told that this was not the case. Kim Taewon himself has finally entered into the dialogue. He argued his behavior by saying that he just felt sorry for the main character. A dark grin was reflected on his face, and at this moment, Ho Seoljin was wary, because this information surprised him. The bell rang. It became known that the next lesson will be Korean. Now the students were late, so they hurried each other. The story focused readers' attention on Kim Taewon, who turned a sad look to the left, and as it turned out, they noticed that there was someone extra among them. However, the main character did not understand this. At that moment, a blonde man appeared, who called him pathetic out loud. For a while he stood and waited for some kind of reaction, but after a short period of time he turned around. Such an unexpected action on his part strained Ho Seoljin. Then he trembled. Moreover, the schoolboy hated webtoons in which the main characters lost to the strong. A picture of Kim Taewon and Yoon Hee-so laughing happily appeared in his mind. The reason was that there were enough defeats in real life. He sat down on the cold tile and hung his head. But the next moment, the guy closed his hands into fists and said out loud that he had had enough. The narration again attracted the attention of readers to his comment, which has now gained 99 likes, when suddenly the figure changed to 2769, which continued to grow, reaching a value of 7,653,961, which did not stop there. Ho Seoljin wanted to be the main character of the story. How suddenly readers could notice how the silhouette of the mysterious character smiled again with a mysterious smile. This man exclaimed that he should try to do it in this case. A charge similar to an electric one appeared in space. He headed towards the school, hitting it from above. There was a commotion inside her. Everyone made the assumption that it was lightning. And the main character at this moment could hear someone talking about how only he could defeat a first-level ranker. Ho Seoljin was surprised, because the silhouette of a naga from a webtoon appeared in front of him. The voice informed him that an unknown person would refuse in front of him. How suddenly readers could notice how the body of the main character moved to the ring. He recognized him, and the swordsman with white hair at that moment asked him a question. He was interested in who the guy was, when suddenly history announced that Ho Seoljin became a student, the name of the lowest class. The story continues its rapid development. This time she describes the action that took place around the swordsman Dean. A push went towards him, which surprised this character to some extent. Then he fell to his knees, and Nagi stood in front of him, holding a sword in her right hand. Suddenly, a voice announced that the fighter Dyer could no longer continue the fight, and the girl with white hair won the duel. The hands of the spectators, who had been watching the stoves all this time, rose up, when suddenly a big man with a horned helmet folded his arms on his chest and said out loud that there was no intrigue again. Moreover, in his opinion, everything was so predictable that it seemed like a waste of money. To his right stood a girl with blonde hair pulled back in a braid. The heroine was chewing something red and at the same time asked a question to her interlocutor. She was interested in what the tall tale he was talking about, referring to the fact that Dean managed to break through the wall of blue flame. That was the only thing that impressed. However, the character objected and wondered what was the point of this, because he still lost. However, readers may have noticed that the blonde was expecting such a reaction, when suddenly she approached her interlocutor, staring at him and forcing him to look at her, and exclaimed that the next thing she would say would be uttered once, so he had to listen carefully to her. According to her, it was the first time in the history of fighting when someone was able to break through the protection of the wall of blue flame. Moreover, the muscular man saw the historical moment with his own eyes. He asked her if it looked like the truth, and as it turned out, yes, because Naga had the first rank. Even better, she had an unshakable defense that no one could overcome. The painting described to readers a huge wall of several meters, which had a bright purple light. When she went up, she left behind a huge column of smoke to appear. This was a distinctive feature of Naga. Suddenly, the story sharpens attention to a large-sized zipper, which acquired a golden color and descended right in front of a character with long white hair. The narrator wondered what had happened, turning her head away from the dust that had risen. After a short period of time, she looked at her lizard, which she had eaten a little earlier, and exclaimed in an offended tone that she had dropped it. She was upset for the simple reason that she left the ponytail for later, and now it was no longer possible to eat it. Suddenly, a muscular man with a horned helmet on his head started talking. He was surprised, because his interlocutor had said a little earlier that it was the first time when someone broke through the protection. And then the character pointed somewhere ahead, urging the girl to take a look. At that moment, Nagi was greatly discouraged. Her red eyes were rounded to an incredible size. The reason was simple and obvious: the wall was breached. In front of the girl with white hair stood the main character in a school uniform, whose face was exposed by small abrasions. No one understood what was going on. Someone from the crowd shouted out that it was like a kind of miracle because some unknown person appeared in front of the invincible Nagi. Yes, and in the very center of her protective spell. The story described how Ho Seoljin stood in a small pit in front of the girl and watched the situation unfold. And Dean was lying on the side on the ground and thinking that it just couldn't be. The wall, which a second-level fighter could barely hook, was destroyed in an instant. There were still huge clouds of smoke around the main character, only now they opened up a view of his figure. He carried himself with pride, as if he knew what he had just done. However, so far readers could not see the expression of his facial expressions, because it was covered by a shadow. Moreover, a dark aura appeared around him. After a short period of time, it became known that he was already on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Large drops of sweat mixed with tears appeared on his face. Mentally, he wondered how it had happened in the first place. Ho Seoljin remembered the character he was standing in front of. Nagi at that moment asked the man to tell her his name. She was cold-blooded. This was the scene he had seen this morning. And if the main character was not mistaken, then the girl was a character from the player. The next moment, he made a guess that made him pull a smile from ear to ear. The guy asked a question out loud. He was curious whether his interlocutor was so interested in the identity of this body. Ho Seoljin crossed his arms over his chest and came to the conclusion that it was a dream. Then he asked aloud a question according to which it was like a lucid dream, although even if it wasn't, he was already nervous a lot. The main character took a couple of steps in the direction of Naga, which is why she told him in a demanding voice not to move. The story informed readers that the girl's class belonged to swordsmen. She was known for using the earth element. However, Ho Seoljin ignored her request, asking her a question in return. He wondered what she would do if he kept moving. Such an audacious remark surprised Dean, who was still watching the stranger and his rival suddenly appear from the side. As it turned out, the Naga's strength increased from the connection with the ground. At that moment, black smoke began to appear around the lower part of the girl's body, and the defeated man mentally suggested that he needed to come a little closer. The heroine, with an angry expression in her eyes, began her remark. She said that if he took another step, then this stubbornness would have to be stopped. A wall of blue flames appeared around her and the main character. The schoolboy instantly became alert, because it was so huge in size that the border of the arena ended a few meters away. The audience changed their faces at the same time, and her former rival in his head was surprised by the fact that Naga still had so much strength left that she was able to continue conjuring, making the assumption that she was never tired. He was scared. Readers could tell by the red aura that enveloped his body. Moreover, the scarecrow was this: the girl caused a true wall. Her hair was blowing in the wind, which gave her silhouette a certain mystery. Then the picture showed that the main character was about to be dealt a crushing blow any minute. After all, it was impossible to resist such a person even on his feet. Although even Ho Seoljin's face was no longer the same. Dean asked himself a question. He was wondering if the stranger was okay, who the next moment turned his head to the left side, at the same time curious about why the wind suddenly blew. In his opinion, it was refreshing. Nagi, who had fallen ill and tensed up, indicated to herself that her new opponent was not going to back down, which means, in that case, she should have accepted the challenge. She grabbed her sword, which was enveloped in blue energy, and gave a positive response. However, the guy was only alerted by such a rare action. At this very moment, Dean was mentally pondering on why Nagi pulled out her sword, and then made the assumption that she was afraid. It just seemed impossible to him, because Ho Seoljin didn't seem so strong. The The next episode describes how the main character tried to cover his head with both hands to protect himself from the threat that arose, and then he exclaimed because he saw a knife. He made it clear that it was a mistake, but such strange behavior baffled Nagi. The guy closed his eyes and thought that no matter what kind of dream it was, but cold steel was too much. After a short period of time, the student forced himself not to be afraid, although he was only trying to drive this thought into himself. After all, if Ho Soljin is a loser in a dream, then how was he going to continue living at all? Aloud, the guy gave a negative answer, which only angered the rival, in whose red eyes anger appeared. The main character tried to set himself up that it was all a simple dream. He asked the girl a question, pointing out that he was not so simple. The next moment, the guy made a swinging motion and said the previous phrase again. Moreover, the student was sure that he would be able to win. He took a step, which provoked the appearance of a blue flame around his foot, a burden in ordinary slippers, and then he approached his opponent. Dean, who had been watching the stranger suddenly appear all this time, wondered, calling the main character's attack strange. And he, in turn, was already thinking that even if it wasn't all a dream, and all the actions might seem thoughtless, but all this bravado had a basis. Readers might have thought that Ho Soljin was serious. He headed in the direction of Naga, with whom he did not move at all, so he had to assume that she was not going to kill. The student mentally wondered if the girl had changed her mind. Maybe she was just scaring him, and then she wanted to keep him alive. But Ho Soljin did not know yet that from the moment the heroine pulled out the sword, the only outcome for him was a loss. Suddenly, a blue glow appeared around the character, the appearance of which took him by surprise. In an instant, it grew to several meters. The audience wondered what had just happened, when suddenly the girl called out to the commentator. She asked to name the result, which was picked up by the others in the arena. Someone explained out loud that no matter how you look, but the main character could no longer continue the fight. And the next moment Nagi was made the winner. Someone's hand rose, trying to get out of the ruins, when suddenly it was proclaimed that the continuation was to follow. A bright blue glow came from someone's smartphone. A man with blonde hair was holding a phone and was surprised that everything ended this way. After all, it was so boring, it didn't even cause any emotions. Moreover, an unknown character said out loud that it was different from what he was promised. Such an end was simply unacceptable. After this remark, a mysterious smile appeared on his face, which to some extent expressed a threat. The silhouette brought his finger closer and pressed on something. After that, Ho Soljin himself appeared to the readers. It was as if he was floating in some kind of space without consciousness. The light fell on him, and the guy himself made the assumption that he was dead. The schoolboy opened his eyes and made the assumption that this was the end. When suddenly there was a bright flash, some kind of image began to appear. The main character mentally wondered what it was. In the new episode, a silhouette of a girl with blonde hair appeared. She screamed at the top of her voice for the guy to get up. Such a movement made him alert. He cast his gaze to the side and saw a stranger. She had long hair pulled back in a braid and big yellow eyes. The girl sat in front of him and made sure with a calm tone of voice that Ho Soljin had finally woken up. That's just the system did not show her name, class, or rank. The heroine strained her eyebrows, which made her face look like a cute child. In her opinion, everything looked so stupid. And then she began to pry, so that the student uttered a word. He didn't even answer her. But when she said this phrase out loud, Ho Soljin asked her a question. He was interested in what place he was in. Suddenly, a fire appeared around his neck, which he tried to grab with both hands and remove. As it turned out, it was a girl who made it clear to the main character that she showed kindness by spying on him, who came here without asking. The stranger was outraged that the guy also dared to ask her questions, referring to the fact that he wanted to tie up the dispute. The flame increased in size, which greatly alarmed the guy. The stranger finally said that he had crossed the border and now he had to pay for it. In the next moment, she was ordered to stop. She obeyed. The fire disappeared from the main character's neck, causing him to bounce back. A new character with blonde hair appeared in front of Ho Soljin. Behind the man's back, a sword could be seen, from which flames also emanated. He pulled a smile and asked for forgiveness, referring to the fact that the girl had recently been born. It was nice to meet him. However, when the stranger called his name, the main character could not make out, because he called him incorrectly. As it turned out, his name was Aso. He was the god of this world. However, in the next episode, the girl asked the mysterious gentleman to let her go, explaining that this schoolboy was the first to start a quarrel, to which he instructed her to moderate her ardor, because he had told her before that otherwise she might completely lose her face. Then he looked at Ho Soljin and came closer. An unexpected movement on the part of the so-called god made the main character, who was watching him from below, wary. The guy, whose face was hidden by a black object, stuck his sword, which scared the schoolboy. Ho Seoljin tried to hide his face and shouted at the top of his voice that he had made a mistake, and plaintively demanded that he not be beaten and spared. However, the stranger aloud made the assumption that his new acquaintance did not fully understand the whole situation, and for this simple and obvious reason he would try to explain it to him in another way. The guy asked the main character to listen to him carefully. At these words, Ho Seoljin opened his eyes and looked at the outstretched hand. God turned to him and made it clear that the schoolboy was chosen to become a player in this place. The action of the next chapter develops around God, who gave his hand to the main character, and told him that he had been chosen to this place to become a player. From such a remark, the student was confused. There was a kind of horror and fear on his face. Apparently, he did not understand how to react correctly to the information received. In the next episode, the guy looked up at the mysterious character and asked him a question. As it turned out, he was interested that wasn't it just the name of a webtoon. However, the latter, in turn, asked him in response if Ho Seoljin had not read carefully. It became known that there was no, because the main character was curious about what was there. God looked at him for a while and was silent in bewilderment. After a short period of time, the character started to say something, when suddenly he stopped. He raised his right hand and made a gesture as if he wanted to snap his fingers now. The man was going to show it. There was a bright flash of bright blue color. It was followed by an image of a huge tower with many small windows. The story familiarized readers with the heavenly castle called the Terrarium. This design was a dream full of gold, silver, and a sweet sense of victory. Images of large chests, swords, old portraits, and, of course, jewelry appeared before the eyes of the audience, and those who wanted to climb into this castle were called players. The narrative described to its readers a muscular man with a sword hanging behind his back. There was a red headband on his head that was fluttering in the wind. The character was looking somewhere in front of him, turning his back to the audience. Then it introduced them to other mysterious heroes. Ho Seoljin was still repeating the words of his interlocutor, not to the end, not believing what was happening to him now. And God continued to convince him of the truthfulness of his remarks, giving a positive answer each time. As it turned out, both Dina and Nagi, and him, too. Instantly, a sinister smile appeared on the suspicious character's face, which was only misleading. It was difficult for readers to get ahead of what he was thinking, because his eyes were hidden by a black object in the form of pixels. The main character lowered his head and asked God, making the assumption that he was now a player like the others, to which he replied, calling it pretty cool. He turned his back to Ho Seoljin and placed his sword on his back, moving forward impressively. Suddenly, something made him turn around and smile slightly. As it turned out, it was a schoolboy who, out of horror and surprise, tried to understand why he was chosen. He pointed at himself and glanced at the man with blonde hair. Why was he surprised, not happy with such a reaction? He wondered why the main character didn't like it. Ho Seoljin got up on both feet and approached the god, simultaneously shouting at the top of his voice, trying to understand why he needed all this, because now he will have to fight all the monsters. Moreover, he could not come to terms with the idea that someone could so easily declare such information. The student was angry at the fact that someone decided for him what he needed to do. That's just God objected to him, repeating the last phrase of his interlocutor, referring to the fact that it was the main character who made the promise. After this remark, bewilderment, or even madness, appeared on his face, because he did not understand anything at all. Suddenly, the story focused readers' attention on the comment left by Ho Seoljin. It said that if his message becomes the best, then, no matter if he has a burning or some other sword there, he will cope with his opponent. Moreover, Nagi was already in the terrarium right now, so the guy first had to become at least a player. The main character grabbed his head and was surprised that this whole situation happened because of the usual comment. However, these words made God turn around and ask the student a question. The man wanted to make sure that he wrote it after thinking carefully. Dark energy formed around him. Apparently, the character was angry with his guesses. His appearance made Ho Seoljin feel embarrassed and close his eyes. The next moment, God burst out laughing. In the new episode, it became known that he was just joking, but, as it might seem, this information did not make the student relax at all, because large drops of sweat were still flowing down his face. After a short period of time, the mysterious man made it clear to his anxious interlocutor that no one forced him. Moreover, he could give up right now. After this sentence, a mysterious smile appeared on his face again. There was just one but. God did not think that the guy would want to return to the real world, which greatly alarmed him. The eyes of the main character rounded to an unimaginable size. He lowered his head and remembered about reality. Images of Kim Taewon and Yoon Hee-so looking down at their classmate appeared in Ho Sol-jin's mind. They didn't put a schoolboy in anything. However, in the next moment, the main character had some idea. He was taken aback. At that moment, a god appeared in front of him, who squatted down and left his sword aside, asking the guy if he still wanted to return. The boy sat on the cold floor in thought. As it turned out, it became much easier for him. He turned to Mr. Aso and asked him a question. The story introduced readers to the real desire of the character. He was interested in what he would get if he rose to the first place. After such a bold remark, a mysterious smile appeared on the man's face as if he was up to something. And then he opened his mouth wide, as if he was preparing to eat it, and exclaimed that the schoolboy could take anything he wanted. God extended his hand to his interlocutor, and he shook it. In that case, he agreed. In the next episode, the story describes how a character with blonde hair stuck his large sword into the floor, lined with pink tiles. A moment later, he began his monologue by saying that now God was going to send Ho Sol-jin to the tower. At that moment, the guy was standing inside the yellow circle. The man added on his own that this was the only time he saved a schoolboy, because he would not be able to do it a second time. So God instructed him to be careful in a duel. The main character was listening attentively to his interlocutor when suddenly he distracted him, saying that it was time to start. However, Ho Sol-jin stopped him, to which he replied that he wanted to do a pretty cool thing. As it turned out, the student argued his behavior by the fact that a man with blonde hair and closed eyes was going to send him empty-handed. But God was not at all confused by this. He curled his lips into a tube and asked what was wrong. The main character called him irresponsible, referring to the fact that even novice trainers received their first Pokémon, which is why the schoolboy asked him to give him at least something. However, as it became known in the next episode, he had nothing. Suddenly there was a girl who objected to both characters that she tried to listen to them calmly, but there was something that alarmed her. The heroine appeared in front of Ho Sol-jin, shrouded in flames, and turned to a schoolboy who was looking at the smoke appearing under her feet. The girl was terribly angry. The reason was that the guy was talking to God as a friend. Her white hair, gathered in a long braid, stood on end. Such an aura was similar to the main character. He compared it to the one that the company from his class had. She hovered and looked down at him, crossing her arms and making a remark to the couple to behave normally. At that moment, the student hit his head on the ground and, trembling all over, gave her a positive answer. God was humbly silent all this time and watched as the heroine mocked her interlocutor, punishing him in various strange ways. And then he laughed. Why did these two turn their heads in his direction and stare in bewilderment? As it turned out, a man with closed black pixels eyes found them funny when suddenly a brilliant idea came to his head. The character has made a decision. He asked the main character a question, asking him a question according to which the guy said to give him something. The beginning of his remarks somewhat puzzled both Ho Sol-jin and the girl. And in the next episode, the hero made him an offer to take the interlocutor with him, pointing at her and bringing her closer to him. Apparently, none of these two were happy with this outcome of events. The first turned to Mr. Aso, adding from herself that she did not want to, because God told her to come down to earth with a guy she disliked. The next moment, Ho Sol-jin entered the dialogue, who also did not want to go with the heroine, whom he considered crazy. However, the man tried to calm them down, referring to the fact that he had already firmly decided what he was going to do. With one wave of his left hand, God sent a girl with white hair into the yellow circle. She stepped on it, and Mr. Aso twisted a satisfied smile and wished them a good time. Finally, in the next episode, readers were able to find out the name of an attractive heroine. It became known that her name was Excalibur. And no matter what anyone says, she was a sword made by God himself. For this simple and obvious reason, the girl will be useful to Ho Sol-jin. A blue glow appeared around the heroes, which made them worry even more. Excalibur called out to Mr. Aso, to which he replied that when they returned, they would have ice cream. As it turned out, the girl didn't even know what it was. Something similar to lightning appeared in space, which raised huge clouds of smoke and dust after itself. In the next episode, a certain silhouette began to clear his throat. After a short period of time, it turned out that it was Ho Sol-jin, who mentally exclaimed with a dissatisfied tone of an inner voice that this lightning had appeared again, objecting that there really was no other way to move. Suddenly the main character remembered Excalibur. He looked in front of him and made the assumption that the girl with the strange name was there. The next moment, the heroine looked at her hands. However, readers could not see her expression, for the reason that it was hidden by the shadow of her long bangs. Suddenly, the heroine grabbed her white hair and, overcoming crying, gave up shouting at the top of her voice, expressing with all her appearance that she was angry. The man made sure for himself that his new friend had decreased to some extent, so he addressed her aloud, calling her a child, which made her angrier. She fiercely threw questions at the student, according to which he deliberately pretended not to know her. Moreover, she blamed him for everything that happened. And, apparently, to let off steam, Excalibur hit Ho Saljin so hard that he flew away. At this very moment, Mr. Aso was watching them, holding his chin with his right hand. As it turned out, the man forgot to tell them something. The story describes to readers how one of the characters asked the other what kind of place it was. The second made the assumption that someone lived in the dilapidated head. And God continued his remark by saying that without the trials it would have been quite boring. A sinister smile appeared on his face. It became clear that he had prepared a training quest for them. Suddenly, a huge silhouette of a man appeared behind Excalibur, who was dressed in many skins of different colors and sizes. The girl did not notice him and asked her interlocutor a question, asking if he thought it was important, referring to the fact that she was small and fragile. But with his whole appearance, Ho Saljin showed that something was alarming him. The heroine was curious why he did not answer her, adding that his reaction was due to the fact that she scared him. Only readers could notice how the stranger raised his hand, clenching it into a fist. The main character rushed in the direction of his partner, at the same time shouting at the top of his voice to be careful, when Excalibur's body suddenly appeared in the air, spinning and thus raising gusts of wind. She noticed the threat and managed to turn away from the blow, but the stranger continued to advance, rapidly moving in her direction. The girl used her fists to slow down her opponent and weaken him to some extent. However, the next episode describes that she was hit in the neck, which caused the heroine to clench her jaw, making a grin and moaning in pain. The stranger, who had a red hide on his head, also used his fists. They came together in a duel, the power of which was so strong that both rivals broke the ground under them. When the girl was next to him, he asked if she was okay, to which she replied that she did not notice how he appeared. Ho Saljin turned to the stranger after a short period of time, asking him a question. He was interested in who he was and for what reason he attacked, because in fact the characters did nothing to him. Suddenly, the main character and Excalibur were surrounded by a group of people who also wore a red skin. The man replied that they should have asked them this question. The story informed readers that the characters met with a guild of robbers called Red Hoods. Moreover, they were at her base. The player Red Wolf, belonging to the monk class, made it clear to the uninvited guests that they would pay for breaking into this place. Ho Saljin's eyes widened to an unimaginable size. He was very scared because large drops of cold sweat began to appear on his face. But the same could not be said about his partner, because she was serious. A red silhouette appeared behind them. The man gave orders to grab the girl first. Suddenly, the figures of the guild members appeared in the air, which forced Excalibur to prepare for an attack. As it turned out, this was the reason why she did not like the earth. When the main character asked her what they needed to do, the girl asked him to be quiet. When suddenly she exclaimed to Ho Saljin to hold tight. However, he did not understand what exactly. Suddenly, a fiery glow appeared in the air, which in a second took the form of a sword. One of the guild members asked, apparently, the leader what was wrong with this heroine, and he, in turn, made the assumption that it looked like a weapon. The main character exclaimed that now he would be able to win. However, something caused the Red Wolf to attract his attention, and Mr. Aso just laughed at that moment. As it turned out, the thing was that the edged weapon was broken. Now the main character was not sure of victory. The story continues its fascinating narrative, according to which it became known to readers that Excalibur was the sword of the ego, a cold weapon that had a soul, something that grew stronger with its master, a legendary sword with unlimited possibilities. A silhouette of a girl with long hair appeared before the eyes of the audience, who stood behind a huge number of different cold weapons. It only became known from the words of Mr. Aso that this did not mean that he had now become as weak as his current master. The story once again focused readers' attention on the main character, who was trembling all over. The reason was that he had Excalibur in his hands, only broken. The narration presented a student's card, according to which his name was Ho Saljin. He belonged to the class of students and the rank of a beginner. At this moment, the guy fell into prostration, because it will be difficult for him. As it turned out, Excalibur herself wasn't expecting such a setup either, because she howled, wondering what had happened. Moreover, the sword also had a business card stating that its class was called Ego Sword and the rank was beginner. The girl's eyes widened to an unimaginable size. Large drops of sweat began to flow down her face, and the heroine herself shrank and spoke aloud with a successful and frightened expression of facial expressions that she could not believe that she had become so insignificant. In her opinion, everything was over, and for this reason Excalibur wanted to get home with every fiber of her soul. She approached the stone wall and leaned her head on it. And the main character, in turn, was somewhat discouraged by such strange behavior of his new friend. He approached her and asked her a question. He was interested in what they would do now. However, the heroine wanted to be alone, so she answered him with a menacing tone of voice so that the guy would not touch her once again. Suddenly, the story focuses on the Red Wolf. The man's face might have seemed stern. He suddenly found himself behind the main characters and said out loud that the situation seemed stupid to him. The first remark made the student turn around and tense up, because a mysterious dark aura formed around the guild member, which was somewhat frightening. In the next episode, it became known that the man felt some interest in what his opponents were, but then he came to the conclusion in the affirmative that they were not strong. And in this case, they had to pay for sneaking into the territory of the Red Hoods. His words made the main character scream in horror. He didn't understand what was going on. A nightmare froze on his face, and then the narrative began to describe the members of this very guild. The first man who allowed made Excalibur and Ho Saljan understand that they would not even think of running away was of a large build. His body was covered with a white shirt, over which there was a red vest. In this color, a bandana was hanging on his head. The second guy was blonde and had a sharp nose and chin. He pulled a sinister smile and said he would take care of their eyes. At this moment, the main character turned completely red from the pressure from dangerous characters and the evil aura, which had a close energy. Tears were already welling up in his eyes, and in his head, the schoolboy concluded that the people standing in front of him were real psychopaths. Only he understood that he had to get out of that place by all means. He closed his eyes and began to think. It was only in the next episode that Excalibur attracted his attention, whose face readers could not yet see. But, apparently, she was serious about something. It could be understood by her confident gait. The main character turned his head at her over his right shoulder and called out, trying to figure out what his friend was up to. The girl turned to the Red Hoods. She was angry because flames appeared around her hair. As it turned out, her entire body was shrouded in fire. Excalibur raised her right hand up and pointed with her thumb somewhere behind her back. She was asked a question by her opponent. Readers became aware that the girl was interested in why the men from the guild put her on the same level with this loser. It was about the main character. Readers could notice how irritable she was because the vessels on her forehead became clearly visible. The next moment, the Red Hoods trembled with fear. One of them was surprised that the girl had such a powerful force that they felt. His friend picked up the drooping and wary mood and said that it was hard for them to even just stand. For this simple and obvious reason, the bandits made the assumption that the heroine was a ranker. Suddenly, the story focuses readers' attention on God, who pulled a smile from ear to ear and said aloud, cursing slightly. As it turned out, he was unhappy because Excalibur managed to retain his power after all. The heroine raised her right hand and pointed it at her rivals, wishing that they finally lost and got what they deserved. A bright yellow light formed around her, and the next moment it grew to a huge size, taking the form of an explosion or a burst of magic. Such a strong push provoked the appearance of a strong wind flow, which raised high clouds of smoke and dust. Every member of the guild was wary, because they could not have imagined that Excalibur was capable of something like this. A man with a red skin on his head entered into the dialogue. He asked what was happening now, referring to the fact that he had never seen such outstanding abilities. One of his comrades turned to the commander and replied that now was not the right time to admire unfamiliar magic, because they had to escape. This guy was literally shouting at the top of his voice because it was hard to hear him because of the wind. That's just, in the opinion of the girl herself, it was too late. She burst into an evil laugh and bared her snow-white teeth. And at this moment, the main character turned his back on her, at the same time often casting a glance at his friend. Readers could make a bold assumption that the schoolboy was going to run away. But Mr. Aso didn't like it. He said out loud his thoughts, according to which he could not allow this. The mysterious character pulled a sinister smile from ear to ear, thinking of something. In the next episode, a small tongue of flame appeared next to Excalibur's hand, which suddenly disappeared. From the expression on the girl's face, it was clear that she clearly had not planned this. She began to try to use her fire power with renewed vigor, at the same time shouting at the top of her voice with anger that this should not have happened. The Red Wolf, who had been watching his rival for some time, began to follow her hopeless situation with bewilderment. When suddenly the heroine stopped. She looked away from her big yellow eyes and threw her right hand behind her head in a gesture as if she was uncomfortable. An aura formed around her that had an embarrassing look. However, the man couldn't take it anymore. He crossed his muscular arms over his chest and gave the order to the members of his guild that they began to destroy. And those, in turn, gave a unanimous positive answer and quickly rushed towards Excalibur and Ho Saljan, who, by the way, has not been seen for a long time. The wind rose around the captain from the fast speed of the fighters. As it became known in the next episode, the main character has been moving away from danger all this time. The story described how I watched the upcoming battle from the side. According to his thoughts, the student asked a question. He wondered if his friend could not use her power because he intended to disappear from the Stanishnaya field under the guise. That's just Ho Saljan made a firm decision that he could not leave the girl and just go alone. However, the guy did not finish the next remark. The story described how his eyes widened in horror. Apparently, the main character was scared of something. In the next episode, the narration focused readers' attention on a man with a red skin on his head. There was an ominous aura around him, but so far his face was hard to see, as if it expressed nothing. When suddenly the picture showed his eyes in close-up. There was an intimidating red color burning in them. The mysterious character strained his eyebrows, which made his wrinkles clearly visible. They gave him extra age. He looked like a predator that was preparing to hunt its prey. Such a strange reaction alerted Ho Saljan. He raised his head, which was wet with sudden sweat, and his eyes widened with panic because he had not managed to escape. Suddenly, the action shifts to the main character, towards which a group of bandits was heading. The guild members shot up and seemed to freeze in the air, thus flying towards their rival. One of them shouted, so that Excalibur would definitely hear, that she was shaking with fear. That's just the girl turned her head over her right shoulder and came to the conclusion out loud that there was nothing left for them. She called out to Ho Saljan, asking him to take on one or even two bandits. However, the heroine did not finish, because she did not find the silhouette of the guy behind her, deciding that he was missing. Why, a quiet horror froze on her face. She screamed at the top of her voice, hoping that her partner would respond. The girl was terribly angry and annoyed. It could be understood by the way she cursed Ho Saljan, who at that very moment, for some reason, was running through a grove full of tall trees and lush green bushes. According to his thoughts, it became known to readers that the guy made the assumption that someone could consider him stupid. Moreover, he definitely did not make plans to fight them, for the simple and obvious reason that he would not count his bones. The student greedily gulped air to restore heavy breathing, when suddenly, a suspicion suddenly appeared in his head that it was too quiet. He thought that something might have happened. Ho Saljan stared in front of him, trying to focus his vision, and suddenly decided that Excalibur could have been captured by guild members. That's just the main character doubted. He tried to set himself up for positive thoughts, saying to himself that the girl was strong, and therefore he could not worry and think about useless things. Moreover, it seemed to him that once he got into this mysterious world, something had to change in his life. The schoolboy clenched his jaws and thus opened a view of his grin. Then he closed his eyes and came to the conclusion that the guy's presence would only interfere with the girl. But nothing has changed in his life. Suddenly, Ho Saljan tripped over a rock. Apparently, he did not notice him due to the fact that he was immersed in his thoughts. The weather was nice. The sun was shining outside, focusing on the edge of the forest. The main character called himself a weakling, in the end. And the reason was that he allowed himself to run away and leave his friend alone in trouble. The schoolboy was lying face down on some dirty path. In the next episode, the guy stood up slightly, leaning on both hands. Readers may have noticed involuntary movements of his body. As it turned out, Ho Saljan was shaking. For some time he was silent and looked down in front of him, so the audience could not see the expression on his face. Then the main character bent down slightly and suddenly said, summing up that there was nothing to be done now. He asked himself a question. He was interested in whether an ordinary schoolboy could do something, when suddenly he gave himself an answer that was negative. Suddenly, images surfaced in his head in which he was hiding from his classmates, lowering his gaze and resigned to his position. There was a red aura around him that had a somewhat intimidating appearance. Ho Saljan sat on his knees and made a firm decision that it would be better this way. Only the next moment he was interrupted. Someone asked him a question, according to which the guy ran away, and not for the first time. This phrase made the student wake up as if after a long sleep. His eyes widened in surprise. The mysterious silhouette called the guy pathetic, which made his expression look drooping. And he decided something. In the new episode, the story focuses readers' attention on the head, which towered to the very heavens, and then to Excalibur. The girl's face was completely covered in abrasions and bruises. According to someone's words, the heroine is already so tired. Moreover, it seemed to this audacious character that such a pretentious and self-confident girl would be able to give something worthy. It was a man with a red hide on his head. He raised his left arm, showing his biceps, and said that his opponent was just weak. Excalibur was sitting on the cold ground, holding onto her legs. There were huge clouds of smoke and dust around both characters. Apparently, the battle was fierce. That's just the heroine wasn't scared at all. She strained her eyebrows and looked at the speaker with a smug expression on her face and objected that he had no right to say such words to her for the simple and obvious reason that all his guild members did for him. In her head, the confident girl exclaimed that she was annoyed by this behavior. The Red Wolf, in turn, pulled a victorious grin from ear to ear and summed it up, saying that he felt some pity that the life of such a baby could suddenly end. The character made a swinging motion using only his fist. At that moment, Excalibur was worried that she couldn't use her power because everything could turn in her favor, when suddenly the main character suddenly appeared in front of her, which greatly puzzled the guild commander, who was still preparing to deliver a crushing blow. The man exclaimed as if he was angered by the fact that another opponent had appeared. But the girl was more puzzled. Her eyes widened, and her eyebrows were directed. Her mouth opened in silent horror. In the next episode, there was a jolt and an explosion of energy, among which readers could only see the silhouette of a red wolf. And then the story showed the expression of his touchy face in close-up, which after a short period of time was directed at the main characters. Ho-Soljan covered Excalibur with his body, which at that time was trying to get out of his grip, shouting at the top of his voice about why he had returned, referring to the terrible fact that he was always running like the last loser. The enraged girl was firmly convinced that she would be able to cope without his help. However, all he answered was a question according to which the guy wanted to know why it was impossible to be a loser. Readers in the next episode saw tears on his face. The heroine was taken by surprise by such a reaction. She watched the student and was silent, when suddenly the girl exhaled and pushed him away. Aloud she made it clear to him that it was not prohibited by law. The guy looked at her and began to wipe away the tears that flowed down his dirty face. Excalibur then held out her hand to him, indicating that he should hold on to it. It became known to the audience that she made an offer to Ho-Soljan to try again. The expression on her face expressed the desire to win. The story focused on the main character, on whose cheek the last tear flowed. Suddenly he smiled and gave a positive response, shaking hands with his girlfriend. That's why both she and Mr. Iso were inspired. The latter made it clear that they had passed the test. A huge column of flame appeared in the air, apparently heading towards the Red Wolf. The man raised his head and began to follow the mysterious phenomenon, wondering what kind of power it was. In his opinion, it was impossible to become the first rank, like Nagi, although even a little higher. A small charge, similar to an electric one, appeared around Ho-Soljan's body. As it turned out, he was summoned by the sword. This time it looked like a full-fledged one. There was a bright aura of yellow and blue colors around him. The story told about how a schoolboy was going to climb to the top, and the only one who needed to be defeated was himself. The story continues its rapid development. She begins the description of the new chapter with Excalibur, around which energy was formed in the form of blurred lines of orange and yellow colors that seemed to float through space. The girl put her eponymous hand to the right side and looked at her with a dubious expression on her face. As it became known, she gave only half of her strength. Then the picture turned its attention to the main character, who, in her opinion, made a sudden decision to take away all the remaining magic of God in her. The student held a sword with both hands, on the blade of which small flames played. Ho-Soljan seemed to be in prostration. The shadow of his long bangs hid his eyes a little, but the audience could still see them and compare them as with glass. Aloud, the guy exclaimed that it was time to start. In front of the main character were the frightened silhouettes of the guild members. Apparently, the reason for their fear was that the guy's figure was literally shrouded in fire, which continued to grow. One of the red wolves turned to the other with a worried expression on his face and asked him to come out first, arguing that the man was huge, and therefore how could he hide from behind? The same character, in turn, opened his mouth and silently watched the speaker, because he did not understand how to react correctly to this remark. However, they were interrupted by a stern voice. It was the commander around whom the dark energy connected with anger and neglect gathered. In a demanding tone of voice, he gave the order for his comrades to leave, because he wanted to deal with Ho-Soljan himself. Readers could trace how, after some madness, this hero's vessels on his muscular arms became more emphasized, which gave him a more intimidating appearance. The man strained his limbs and asked a question to the guild members who were standing behind him. He wanted to make it clear who he hated the most. As it turned out, the answer was simple: those who only know how to rely on their trinkets. Actually, this was the reason why he created his guild of thieves. The picture showed a close-up of a nervous and stern commander, who was also burning with a bright flame. However, the main character, who was in question, did not mentally understand what his opponent was talking about. When the blinding glow disappeared, the man raised his head and, releasing steam from his mouth, forced Ho Soljan to watch how to use his power. Suddenly the earth trembled, and the next moment it began to burst at all, as if a mysterious character provoked the occurrence of an earthquake. Then a huge earthen boulder rose into the air. The guild members admired their commanders, who, according to them, was always confident in his words. However, the speaker was interrupted because he was only getting in the way. The Red Wolf continued his monologue with the fact that no matter the ego sword, or a simple knife, as he called it, if the student can't get closer, then there will be no use from him anyway. A huge earthen structure rose on the fragile, in comparison with him, figure of the main character, blocking his sunlight. Readers could notice for themselves that small charges, similar to electric ones, were darting around Ho Soljan. In the next episode, the embittered guild commander shouted at the top of his voice, wishing that the schoolboy could not cope with the stone and lost the fight. But regarding his precious sword, he was going to sell it. When the boulder got as close as possible to the main character, who continued to stand motionless, apparently considering a plan of action, then he suddenly got into an attacking pose and pulled Excalibur aside. His dark eyes were blank, as if it wasn't Ho Soljan, who had fled the battlefield some time ago like the last coward. Such a mysterious reaction surprised the Red Wolf, but he did not stop his attack. The stone hit the ground with a powerful jolt. The pressure was so strong that the earth flew into the air. That's just something went wrong with the Red Wolf's plan. The place where the boulder landed exploded. Such an unexpected action caused all the guild members to stand in a stupor, and the commander even asked a question out loud, trying to make sure that his eyes did not let the man down. It was as if a current passed behind him, followed by blue energy, and then they darted into the air. The red waves were stroked by a wave of flame, which lifted them into space like ants at a rapid speed. The flow of fire provoked the emergence of a strong wind that moved dust and earth. Why, there was real chaos everywhere. The guild members couldn't even open their eyes due to the powerful pressure, let alone use their magic to counterattack or even defend. Through the dust, readers could see the silhouette of the main character. The guy lowered his head and bent his back, simultaneously holding Excalibur with both hands, absorbed by the flames. Ho Soljan looked in front of him and summed up aloud in a tired tone of voice that he had managed to do it. He staggered to his left side and fell. A close-up of the story described how in front of the main character, lying on his stomach, legs spread out, the earth seemed to split. Apparently, the schoolboy's blow was so strong that he touched the foundation, leaving a small depression inside which the opponents were. The Thieves' Guild, the Red Hoods, has been eliminated. They lay motionless on the cold ground, not making a sound. And the story informed readers that Ho Soljan now truly began to belong to the class of students and the rank of a beginner. In the next episode, someone was heard laughing. After a short period of time, it became known that it was Mr. Aso. He was lying on a green sofa with huge pillows and held a phone in his right hand, the light from which shone brightly into his eyes, which, unfortunately, were hidden by black pixels. He put his left hand behind his head, supporting it and making the pose more comfortable. Aloud, the man exclaimed joyfully that the situation, or rather the spectacle that happened on his initiative, proceeded perfectly. In his opinion, it has become more interesting to observe. He pulled a smile from ear to ear and suddenly threw his smartphone somewhere behind his back. God took a deep breath and crossed his legs. A shadow enveloped his expression, causing it to take on a somewhat fierce appearance. The man said out loud his thoughts, according to which now all the candidates were finally collected. In the next episode, Mr. Aso lifted his body from the pillow, putting his weight on his legs, and folded his hands, with which he held his head with blonde hair. Readers could notice how there was a chessboard in front of him, on which 2 red game pieces and another blue one were visible. The man was glad of the mysterious fact that it would start its course, as it became known thanks to the following phrase. He was talking about time and the world he created. That's just where the picture ended. She showed readers a clear sky with white clouds, and in the next episode, the story describes how some kind of cart was moving. using a very fluffy animal as a force. As it turned out, his name was Makiko, and his main feature was the fact that he was cute. Then readers focused their attention on the frail male hands that held the reins. After a short period of time, it became known that it was Willius too, who was 86 years old, and he also worked as a cab driver. The character looked quite old, and, apparently, that's why it was very noticeable how his head was shaking. There was a crisis in his quiet life. The reason for this arose literally 30 minutes ago. As the narration tells, he was combing Makiko and at the same time was about to return, when suddenly something interrupted him. Before the eyes of readers appeared a picture in which a man stood next to a huge animal, probably because of the lush and curly hair, holding a wooden comb in his right hand. A stranger asked his grandfather to give him a ride. When the old man turned over his right shoulder, he asked an ill-mannered man a question with an angry tone of voice, referring to the fact that he had his grandfather. The man frowned at his thick gray hair and menacingly watched the interlocutor, and then his face instantly changed. As it turned out, it was Excalibur, on whose head you could see the skin of a red monster that looked like a wolf. These were worn by guild members. The girl was pulling with her left hand the main character, who was unconscious, and with her right hand a large bundle of necessary, in her opinion, things. The next moment, without thinking twice, she gave a negative answer and cast a tired look at the old man. When the heroine got even closer to him, she asked him a question. She wondered if it was impossible to make a request without having a grandfather. Readers could trace how her appearance, and although, perhaps, her appearance puzzled the man, because he moved away from her, leaning his back on Makiko, who was just watching Excalibur questioningly. However, Grandpa waved both hands and gave her a negative answer, adding from himself that he didn't have either. And in his mind, he wondered if Ho Saljin was a corpse. In the next episode, the main characters appeared in real time. Someone called out to the girl, making him nervous. Readers could tell by the frightened expression on his face, which began to drip drops of sweat. It was a girl who was sitting with her back to him and turned her head in his direction over her left shoulder. She asked him why they were moving so slowly. At the very end of the cart was sitting with his head hanging down, although Saljin, who was still unconscious. The old man did not even turn to her, despite the fact that his interlocutor menacingly knocked on the wooden wall and apologized. He was holding the reins when suddenly an eerily red aura formed around him. The man took a cursory glance at the heroine and mentally cursed her because he could not object to her, although he imagined that he could do it if he was 50 years younger. Excalibur at this moment approached her companion and tried to bring him to his senses. She grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, and he suddenly tilted his head involuntarily, which alerted the old man and left the girl confused. When the man turned his head and returned his gaze to the road, he heard strange sounds, according to which the heroine decided that something was broken. In his head, he came to the conclusion that it would be better if he did not interfere. In the next episode, the story describes how Excalibur closely followed the main character. He was lying motionless on the hay with his mouth open, which caused saliva to flow down his cheek. The girl concluded out loud that something had not even moved since he lost consciousness. Then she turned his head, like a child who was touching and learning new things, and wondered if Ho Saljin had died. It wasn't that she didn't care about his physical and moral condition, but she was worried about what would become of her. She asked someone if Mr. Isso would pick her up in that case. Suddenly, the main character jumped up, scaring his friend. She didn't expect such a sudden movement, so her hand reflexively hit Ho Saljin in one piece. The situation was funny for the simple and obvious reason that the student, when he woke up, said out loud the words about fried rice with squid. Actually, that's why he was drooling. After a short period of time, the story described how a bump grew on the guy's head, and the girl asked him a question, according to which he did not remember anything. And he, in turn, grabbed his head and replied that nothing had happened since he took it in his hands. Excalibur thought he would be of some use. However, as it turned out, he remembered that something cool had happened. That's just the heroine decided that there was no sense in this, because the schoolboy forgot everything. He lowered his head and asked for forgiveness. The story showed a close-up of the expression on the face of a girl who made a bold assumption in her head that it was all an accident. However, in her opinion, this could not be true, because it could not be used simply because of luck. She looked at Ho Saljin, who was talking to the old man and admiring Makiko. Excalibur decided that maybe her new boyfriend looked weak and stupid, but at that moment he did not kill any of the enemies. She remembered how the guild members were lying, exhausted and immobilized. While the guy was drooling, the girl came to the conclusion that the student managed to fully control the power of God, when suddenly the main character exclaimed at the top of his voice that he remembered something. So he managed to attract the attention of his partner, who opened her mouth and tried to make sure whether it was true or not. But, in his opinion, it was not so important. However, the girl approached him and asked him not to pull, because anything could help them. As it turned out, the moment Excalibur held out her hand to him, the student felt that she believed in him, so he thanked her. The girl was slightly surprised by this. Her eyes widened. Suddenly, Ho Soljin began to behave strangely. Apparently, the guy was trying to remember the name of the heroine, who the next moment screamed that he couldn't even learn it. The student argued that it was very negatively unusual. The old man listened to them and mentally stressed to himself that the children were very noisy. He wanted to return to the village as soon as possible. Excalibur was hitting the main character at this moment, cursing furiously and noting that this name of Ho Soljin was strange. And he grouped himself and told her that his mother gave it to him. Suddenly, something caught the guy's attention. He asked the girl to look somewhere to the side, why she gave him an order to be silent, because she had not yet taught him to close his mouth in time. However, that wasn't what he was talking about right now. The heroine turned her head and saw the city, in the distance of which there was a huge building with a sharp roof like spikes. It was a village at the entrance to the tower, at which there were guards. Ho Soljin looked at the phone and pen and mentally thought that these were all the things he came into the world with. He grabbed his head and decided that he should have found a side job. But the girl put on a red skin. As it turned out, she stole it all into thieves. The main character opened a bag of gold and exclaimed joyfully that now they didn't have to worry about money, calling the girl a good girl, to which she simply refused. She stood up and made it clear to the interlocutor that he should listen to her more often, to which he agreed. The girl offered to have a snack, but she was interrupted. The old man ordered the guards to seize his passengers. He shouted that the two men had threatened him. Excalibur objected, and the guy seemed to believe, and in the next episode he even called himself a victim. The man from the guard watched them in silence, and later made it clear to them that they were not pretending, because they knew that they were at the same time. And the proof was that the man assumed that the main characters were from the Guild of Red Hoods. Excalibur got angry at Grandpa, and Ho Soljin, dressed in a red skin, replied that they were not related to them, but only their cloaks were similar. The guard didn't believe them. The next moment they were surrounded. Someone was watching the whole spectacle from some high point. This silhouette wanted to see how events would develop. Graduates gathered near the school. The guys took pictures, rejoiced at graduation from high school. Han Disung was walking with his friend. Suddenly, his body lit up with a blue light, and his soul separated from his body. On this ordinary day, the young man fell into hell. There was no day or night, not even sunlight. The guy had been in hell for about 10 days and it was hard to survive. All that could be eaten was the rotting meat left behind by the monsters. Disung found the remains of the animal and began to eat it. A large green creature appeared behind him and was about to attack. The young man managed to react to the appearance of the monster, so he jumped away from him and launched the first stone at the monster. He continued to fight back with stones and the creature escaped. As the days passed, Disung had to give up his humanity in order to survive. He was able to learn to exist in hell. 51 days have passed since the guy appeared in this place. The young man was sitting in a cave and roasting meat on a fire. A notification from the system appeared in front of him, which said that the player's level had been raised to the 3rd level. Thinking that he had gone crazy, Disung still accepted the notification. After that, his abilities increased noticeably. 7 years later, the young man has upgraded his level and skills. He learned how to fight monsters and most of the worms died from a single blow. It's been a long time since that day. At the age of 24, Disung was able to make a sword from the ore obtained from the Steel Knight. With this sword, 51 years later, the young man beheaded a pathetic reincarnation. In 79, Disung went to the Demon King, the one who dragged the guy to hell. There was chaos all around. Wounded monsters lay everywhere. Everything was on fire. Disung was fighting with the creatures when the Demon King's gatekeeper appeared in front of him. This creature was several times bigger than the guy, but he does not intend to give up. Disung held his sword out in front of him and told the monster to open the gate if he wanted to survive. Calling the young man an arrogant fool, the gatekeeper of the Demon King strikes and throws Disung forward a few meters. The young man does not give up. He gets up from the ground and flies to attack. Striking a blow, the guy flies away from the creature. The system says that it was necessary to kill him immediately. Disung watches the monster's further actions and he becomes enraged. The gatekeeper says that he will not leave it just like that and will strike back. Having said this, the monster falls silent and a through hole appears in his chest. Disong launched his sword at him, so he was able to defeat the monster. The creature falls to the ground, and the system says that now the Demon King will definitely get angry, because the young man even killed the guardian of the gate. The guy shrugs off these words and grins, saying that he understands the whole situation. The system decides to ask Disong if he is sure that he wants to kill the Demon King and become the absolute ruler of hell. The guy replies that he is not interested, and the skull asks why then he is fighting against the Demon King. Disong replies that it's been 80 years since he went to hell. He fought monsters to survive. They were all serious and all have different stories and reasons why they got into this hell. Therefore, Disong has a question. Why is he in this hell, and why did the Demon King bring him to this hell? The skull, upon hearing this, suggests that he could have asked the Demon King politely about it. Also, the skull advises Disong on his knees to ask for forgiveness. Thinking that questions are all the young man wants, the system asks what he is going to do. Disong replies that the price must be paid. The price for dragging a young man into hell and making him suffer. The guy stands in front of the Demon King's castle and prepares to go there to punish him for everything. Disong takes off, but before he can reach the king, he wakes up in a hospital room. Disong doesn't understand why he ended up in the hospital and tries to move. His body does not move, and the young man is very scared of this. His mother comes into the ward with a tray in her hands and, seeing her son awake, drops the tray on the floor. The woman runs up to her son and starts hugging him, and the young man does not understand why the dream is so realistic. Then Disong remembers how he killed the Demon King. That day, the skull told the young man that he was now the absolute ruler of hell, and after these words, a notification from the system appeared. The sign said if Disong was ready to return to Earth. The young man wondered if he was ready to return to Earth, because 80 years have passed since he went to hell. Every day he prayed to be free of this cursed place. Therefore, the guy agrees without a doubt. The doctors gathered at Han Disong's bedside to check on the patient's condition. After an examination, the doctor says that the young man has been in a vegetative state for a long time, so at first it will be difficult for him to start moving. But the doctor reassures the patient's mother, saying that if he continues to receive rehabilitation treatment, he will get better. Unexpectedly for everyone, Disong starts screaming heart-rendingly. The young man does not understand when he moved into reality when he received a notification from the system. The children who are in the ward with Disong are frightened by the behavior of the young man and cling to their mother. The doctor runs up to the patient to calm him down. But the guy does not intend to get help, so he bites the doctor's hand until it bleeds. The young man asks the doctor what he did to him, whether it was magic or a paralyzing poison. The guy falls out of bed and continues to shout that he has lived 80 years of struggle and suffering, so he does not intend to die peacefully after all he has experienced. Even when he was dying in the lifeless land of hell, he begged and begged. Two orderlies run into the ward and grab the guy from both sides under the arms. The young man tries to escape and threatens violence. Suddenly, a yellow light catches his attention and Disong looks out the window. He looks up at the sky and does not understand why there is a wormhole here. They put Disong on the bed, and the orderlies hold him so that the young man does not run away again. The guy tries to get rid of someone else's hands, but a drug is injected into his neck. Disong's body has gone limp, and he is falling asleep. A man on the news announces that at about 9 o'clock in the morning over Songpaku, in Seoul, the gate was opened. A team of hunters who were responsible for those surroundings was quickly dispatched to the scene. The street was in chaos. Everywhere lay the bodies of monsters, fragments of buildings. Hunters fought with creatures. The news anchor appeals to the hunters to report on the situation on the streets of Seoul. One of the hunters tells the head that the mission is currently in the final stage of suppression. Under these words, the man plunges a sword into the monster's head. The head asks how long the operation can take. The man replies that, judging by the success of the mission, it may take only an hour. The head is responsible so that after the completion of the mission, he is informed about it. The man will take care of the rest himself. The main thing is that the hunters complete the mission successfully. The hunter accepts the order, and the head puts the phone in the inside pocket of his jacket. The news anchor announces that thanks to the prompt response of the hunter team, the consequences of the gate were quickly eliminated, and then the gate itself was closed. Han Disong opened his eyes and the first thought that crossed his mind was a wormhole. He thought about the fact that there was a team of hunters in it. The head of the hunters enters the chamber and greets the young man. Disong doesn't recognize the man, but after looking at the man's face, he recognized him as Chang Ho. The man asks the patient about his well-being, and the man replies that he is all right. Jang Ho rejoices that Disong has finally come to his senses after 10 long years, after MF fell then. Hearing this, Disong remembers that very day, graduation from high school. Chang-ho says that on that day the young man was full of strength and energy, but suddenly fell, and since then he has been lying in a coma in a hospital bed for 10 years. Thoughts appeared in Disong's head that while he was in hell, it seemed to him that all 80 years had passed, but in reality only 10 years had passed. Young-ho says that during all this time, his mother worked very hard. Due to hospital expenses, she had to get 2 jobs. But Young-ho is in a hurry to calm his friend down, saying that the most important thing now is for Disong to recover as soon as possible and return to his former form. Also, the head of Hunters reports that the patient cannot worry about work. Chang-ho left him one free place. Disong and his mom went out for a walk. The woman was taking her son on a gurney and talking about the good weather. The man practically did not listen to her. He was thinking about what was happening to him while he was in hell. There he fought for a chance to return to his body and survive. But here, he has to take responsibility for his family and help. But at the moment, he can't walk on his own, and it can bring a lot of trouble. And also Disong can become a heavy burden for the family. When the man concluded that in reality there is no less cruelty than in hell, 2 men appear in front of them. One of them had a scar on half of his face, and the other turned to Disong's mom, calling her auntie. The man with the scar asks the woman why they couldn't get through to her. Is she not going to return the money she borrowed? Mom begins to tremble with fear and says that by next month she will prepare the money. The man replies that the woman tells him about it every month and he is tired of listening to these promises. The woman approaches the bandit and taking his hand begins to beg him to give her another month, and this time she will definitely prepare the money. The man did not like this gesture. He violently pulls out his hand and shouts that she should not touch him. He tells Disong's mom that if she borrowed money, she needs to return it on time. The bandit added that this time they would not talk to her in a good way. Tears accumulate in mom's eyes, and she asks not to do this in front of her child. She makes a promise that in the next one she will definitely return the required amount and asks them to let them go. The collector points to the hand, depicting that there is little time left. 2 years have passed, and the woman still has not repaid the debt. Deciding that if he hits her, the woman will listen to him, the man hits her in the face. Seeing this, Han Disong becomes enraged, calling the 2 men a brat. Collectors grin, and mom asks her son not to say so. A man with a scar on his face walks up to Disong and grabs him by the neck, lifting him off the ground. Mom cries and asks her son to apologize to the men. The woman says that her son is not to blame for this situation, because he is a simple patient, so the mother asks the man to let the young man go. The collector does not agree with these words, because all the money went to the treatment of Disong. The young man grins and asks what they are going to do to him in this case, calling them insects. A grin appears on the bandit's face. He calls the guy impudent and says that he has big problems with his head, since Disong decided to continue to get into the conflict. The man also says that Disong really looks like an insect from them. After all, at the moment he is not able to walk, only move his mouth helplessly. Having said that, the collector throws the young man to the ground, and he flies away a few meters. The man approaches the patient and continues to strike. When the thought comes to the young man's head that if they were in hell now, he could quickly deal with him, a notification from the system appears. The sign says that the divine quest is about to begin and an offer to join it. The words were written below that in case of refusal of the quest, the reward will not be received. After the window with the choice suddenly appeared, Disong's doubts were short-lived. After all, these windows were the only thing that helped him survive all these 80 years in hell. All the people around the young man froze and the world turned gray. The young man understands that this happened because he received a task. A notification from the system appears in front of him again, in which detailed information about the task is written. In one of the items it was written about the reward. For a successfully completed task, the young man will receive a medicine to restore the perfect state. A red triangle appears in front of Disong with the inscription 10 meters at the top. The guy realizes that if he gets to the object, he will receive a reward. He decides that he will get there even by crawling, if only he will be returned to his former state. The guy starts to crawl on the ground, but it's hard for him. Disong believes that he can't handle such a small thing when he conquered everyone in hell. At this speed, it is impossible to get to the triangle in the allotted time. The patient understands. He looks up at the message from the system and sees that there are 17 minutes left before the task is completed. Disong decides to think rationally and, after reading the line on which the goal was written, to get to the destination. The young man understands that it is not necessary to reach the subject. It is important to move in any way. The patient begins to examine the objects that surrounded him and sees the stroller on which his mother was taking him. He crawls to the gurney and starts climbing on it. It's hard for the young man, but he was able to get on the wheelchair. In the last seconds, Disong gets to the red triangle and a potion drops out to him. Immediately after the young man drank the medicine, all his strength returned to him and the pain disappeared. The next second, the world stops being gray and people come to life. A man with a scar looks around in an attempt to find a young man. Security guards come to the scene to stop the criminals. Mom notices her son and runs to him to find out how the young man feels. The collector looks angrily in the direction of Dasan, and the other asks him to leave here. The sun has already set over the horizon, and Disong is talking about that window with a choice. He tried to summon him again several times, but there were no results, so the young man decided to give up. While the patient is lying on the bed, the realization comes to him that he needs to restore his body as soon as possible before those collectors come again. When Disong decides to create a quest for himself, a notification appears stating that the pantheon is expecting a visit from perfection. The young man's eyes widen. He does not understand what it was. Meanwhile, the guy is transferred to the pantheon and a notification from the system appears in front of him again. The message says that a virtual avatar was created based on the information in the diaries. From this moment on, it is possible to accelerate its implementation by completing tasks. When the young man realized that what was happening was not like a dream, information about a new task appeared in front of him. Disong needs to destroy the facility. For the completed task, he will receive a memory card for perfection. A huge blue head with protruding fangs from its mouth appears near the young man. Disong exhales deeply and strikes, thereby destroying the specified object. After that, a new notification appears with the task. He needs to run 10 kilometers in 3 hours. As a reward, the young man will receive a medium-sized tonic for perfection. After completing the quest, a new one appears, which says that the guy needs to do 1,000 sets of push-ups in 2 hours. For this, he will receive a tonic. After making 55% of the required amount, Dasan begins to get angry at these tasks, and asks the system for a normal task. When the young man said this, a notification appears with a new quest. It is necessary to fight with the selected object and defeat it in an indefinite time. The next second, a huge creature called a crying demon appears in front of Disong. In hell, the young man almost died because of him, but now he is glad to see this creature. The crying demon lands many blows on Disong, but he manages to dodge. When the young man decides to strike back, the demon throws him away from himself. The guy lands on his feet and decides that being knocked down by a crying monster is humiliating. The demon continues to attack the young man, and he dodges the blows. At one point, the monster grabs Dasan, and then the young man remembers how he once dealt with a demon in hell. Rage appears in the guy's eyes and he manages to cut the demon's hand with a sword. Disong remembered that he could summon a sword and thus he was able to get out of the clutches of a crying demon. The monster raises his wounded arm and begins to scream in pain. At this second, the young man rushes at the monster and defeats him, sending him to hell. After that, a message appears from the system stating that the mission has been completed. The next morning, Disong's mom wakes up to the noise in the ward. She opens her eyes and directs her gaze towards the window. In front of her, she sees her son, who looked much healthier than yesterday. His body gained a healthy look and muscles, and his face did not look haggard. The patient was sent to the doctor for examination. While they were checking the working capacity of his limbs, Mom was talking to the doctor. The woman does not believe this, because at the last examination, the doctor said that rehabilitation would take more than 6 months. Why did Disong start moving as usual in just 15 days? The doctor replies that he can't say anything at the moment. From a medical point of view, the patient's condition is inexplicable. Also, in order to calm the patient's mother, the doctor added that some peculiarities are usually revealed, so there is no need to worry about it. After a long examination, Dasan gets angry and asks the doctor to stop touching him. The man recoiled from the patient and, apologizing, said that such a sharp improvement in the condition was amazing. When the examination was over, Disong strolled through the corridors of the hospital, stretching his arms. Behind him, he heard the voice of his mother, who was talking to a nurse. Mom, taking the girl by the hand, said words of gratitude. The nurse, in turn, replies that what she has done is not worth anything compared to what the woman has been through over the past 10 years. After hearing this conversation, the young man realized how hard it had been for his mother lately. Disong clenches his fists and decides that from now on he will protect his mom. Disong enters the men's room and goes to the pantheon. Once in place, he asks if it is possible to finish the implementation as soon as possible. A notification appears stating that in this arbitrary task, the young man can choose the level of difficulty at his discretion. The guy is serious, and he decides that whatever it is necessary to end it the first time. Therefore, Disung chooses the difficulty level Hell. After that, a black ball with red cracks and a glow inside appears in front of him. The next second, the doppelganger hand Disung appears from the ball. The dark side of the young man is coming at Disung to strike. The opponent flies up to the young man, but he manages to push him away from himself. The doppelganger deals several more attacks. In the next second, Disung is wounded. At that moment, the guy realized that he would not be able to defeat him either in strength or speed in his current state. The young man understands that the longer they fight, the more unprofitable it will be for him. The opponent runs up to Disung and, stretching out his arm, strikes, thereby throwing the young man several meters away. Smoke appears around the guy, and he gets to his feet. The young man grins at the fact that the fake is many times stronger than himself. But Disung does not intend to give up, so, raising his head, he says that today the dark side will die at his hands. In the next second, Disung summons Bloodseeker's Wrath. His eyes turn red, and a burgundy flame appears around his body. Seeing this, the enemy was taken aback for a moment, so he decided to attack. He strikes with his sword, but the weapon passes through Disung's body. The young man takes the doppelganger by the head and presses him to the ground. He sits on top of the opponent and raises his sword to strike, but the dark side manages to slip out of his hands. Disung turns his head in the direction of the opponent and realizes that he is also using the anger of the Bloodseeker. Disung runs up to the enemy to attack, but does not have time. The opponent is behind him and plunges the sword into the young man's back. The next second, the guy is in reality. He is also standing in the toilet, but now his body is shaking from lack of vitality. Worried that the door is closed, the cleaner takes out the keys and starts opening the door. Disung realizes that if he loses, then everything he has accumulated during this time will turn into nothing. Therefore, he needs to come up with something to kill his dark side. When this thought comes to him, the young man remembers about the inventory. Another cleaner enters the toilet and tells Aunt Kim that her name was on the 3rd floor. The woman pulls the keys out of the keyhole and leaves the toilet. At this moment, Disung in the pantheon opens his inventory. The young man stretches his hand into the blue hole and from there the potion that he received for each completed task. It has been lying idle in his inventory all the time, but now it is what he needs. This is a medicine that will help increase endurance by 20%. If that's the case, then after drinking 5 vials, he will be able to fight properly. Disung drinks the medicine and his wounds begin to heal. The young man runs up to the opponent and strikes. This time he manages to bring down the dark side, but the backlash is not long in coming. The guy takes out 2 more bottles of medicine and drinks them. Even though stamina is being restored, fighting is still difficult. Using 5 bottles of medicine, Disung tries to repel attacks. The doppelganger flies up to the young man and grabs him by the neck. The doppelganger raises his sword to stab him in the stomach, and at that moment Disung summons an inventory that appears in front of his stomach. The dark side thrusts the sword into the blue hole, and the young man strikes the opponent with the sword. The guy successfully completes the task and a notification appears from the system, which states that after the final restoration of the body in the real world, the young man will still be able to use the hell system. After this message, Disung returns to his former body with scars. He is glad that he managed to regain his strength, but these scars remind him of hard times in hell. The young man asks the system to return him outside. But before that, a notification about an unread message appears. Disung opens it and starts reading. The message says that Hell welcomes its new sovereign, Han Disung. Since the sovereign has chosen to return to Earth during his absence, the celestial space will be sealed. The demons of the pantheon will be waiting for the arrival of their sovereign. After reading this message, Disung realized that they needed help. But the young man does not intend to help them after 80 years of suffering from them, just because he became their sovereign. The guy shows the middle finger and again asks the system to let him out of here. Disung is still in the hospital. He stands on one hand in his ward and does push-ups, the score of which exceeds 50 times. The door to the ward was open, so Mom and the doctor were watching what was happening. The doctor reports that Disung is awakened. The woman recalls the doctor's words that her son is not like them. The man hurries to calm the young man's mother, saying that at the moment there are no specific symptoms of awakening, so there is no need to worry too much, but still it is impossible otherwise. The woman does not understand how this could happen to her son. The doctor replies that this is all they can do to help. The association should take care of the rest. Disung's mom thanks the doctor for the help. Disung and his mom are riding in a taxi, and the young man begins to talk about what he heard. He tried to pretend that he didn't notice anything, worrying about the task, but the guy understands that it can't be left so easily. Realizing that Mom is hiding something, a question appears in his head. He is wondering what has happened in 10 years of his absence. When they get home, Mom tells her son to rest while she's gone. Daesung goes into the house and sees a girl who is sitting on the floor by the box with money in her hands. When she sees the young man, she gets up and looks at the guy in surprise. Returning, the mother approaches her son and asks what he wants to eat. She sees Jisa in front of her and asks her daughter where she has been. The girl did not answer the phone while her mother was worried about her daughter. Hearing the girl's name, Daesung's eyes widen in surprise. The woman pays attention to an empty open box and realizes that her daughter has taken the money again. The girl shyly lowers her eyes to the floor and puts her hands in her pockets. The young man swears at himself for not recognizing his own sister. The girl tells her brother in a serious voice that he looks healthy, while in his absence every day was like hell. The upset girl is about to leave the house when the voice of those two collectors is heard outside the gate. One of them knocks on the door with his foot and threatens that if the woman does not open, then he will break down this door into the light of 3. The men continue to knock loudly with their feet on the iron door. When they began to doubt that this was really the woman's house, Jisoo came out from there. After giving them an evil look and unpleasant words, the girl left, and the men assumed that this was the debtor's daughter. Collectors entered the territory of the house, asking why the woman did not open the door, because she was at home. Daesung's mom ran up to the men apologizing for it. She explained that she couldn't call them as soon as they were discharged from the hospital today. The woman begins to take out bills from her wallet, saying that this is all she has at the moment. The man throws the wallet aside. His voice breaks into a rude shout, and he says that they did not come here for this paltry sum. The next second he hits the woman and she falls to the ground. Seeing this, Daesung becomes enraged. He approaches the bandit and strikes back. The man falls to the ground and his friend runs up to him to help. Daesung approaches them and the man with the scar on his face does not recognize him as the wheelchair user. The young man says that he wanted to meet them himself, but they came here by themselves. The guy comes closer to them and asks them if they know how he managed to survive in hell. When the man took Daesung's words for nonsense, the young man grabbed the bandit by the face and replied that he always returns everything to those from whom he got. At this second, the guy strikes the man's face. The collector falls to the ground, and Daesung orders him to get up, because he did not repay the entire debt. The man notices a wooden chair and, grabbing it, is going to throw it at the guy. But he fails to do this. The young man punches the chair with his hand and strikes another blow on the bandit's face. Seeing this, his friend gets up from the ground and pulls out a knife. He keeps his distance from the young man, but brandishes a knife in an attempt to strike. Daesung grabs the man by the hand and, remembering that the last time the bandit hit his mother with this hand, the young man breaks the man's limb. A man with a scar on his face comes to his senses and asks the young man if he will be able to live in peace after that. Daesung, with a grin on his face, approaches the man and, taking him by the collar of his shirt, says that there is one way in such cases: kill so that there are no leftovers. Suddenly the mother screams. She begs her son to stop it. When the young man is distracted by his mother's words, the bandits manage to escape from their house. They reach their car, and when the bandit with a wounded arm gets behind the wheel, they begin to discuss the disabled guy who was in the hospital last time. They don't understand how a person who has been in a coma for 10 years could change so quickly. Men are at a loss, they don't know what to do now. The boss told them to get at least a receipt from that woman. The man with the scar on his face replies that it doesn't matter anymore and they need to figure out a way to get a receipt. He looks out the window and sees Jisa, then asks his colleague to stop the car. Meanwhile, Mom tells her son about what happened over the past 10 years. When Daesung fell, the woman walked around a huge number of hospitals, not knowing what happened to him. Then she sold the house and left their shop. Mom thought that her son would recover quickly, but in the end, all the money they had flew away. On the recommendation of a friend, the woman received a loan in the financial sector, but it was not easy to repay the debt. Not only the amount on the loan was growing, but also the interest on it. Daesung decides to ask about his sister. He asks if Jisoo goes to school and why she has such an appearance. Mom replies that the girl dropped out the year before last. Last year, a woman injured herself while working at a diner and Jisoo said she would help. Daesung's sister is also suffering. During the day she works at a gas station, but at night she goes to work in a store. The young man says that it was necessary to stop her, because Jisoo has to study at school. The woman replies that she stopped, but it was necessary to follow her son. The guy replies that he should have left him. Mom asks her son not to say that, because they are a family. The phone rings, interrupting their conversation. The woman picks up the phone and says that these are the people. Daesung takes the phone from his mother and asks the men what they are calling for. After their answer, the young man becomes enraged. Men ride in a car with Jisoo. The girl's hands and feet are tied, and her mouth is sealed with duct tape. A collector with a scar on his face tells Disong that the young man has a day to find 100 million. Looking at his skills, this task will not be difficult for him, the man adds. The bandit told Disong not to do anything extra if he wanted his sister to stay alive. The guy hangs up and squeezes the phone in his hands. Worried by the expression on her son's face, Mom asks him why these people called and what they want. The young man is about to leave, informing the woman that he will be back soon. The woman stops her son and tells him that if it is something dangerous, then he does not need to go there. If the son goes to prison after hurting someone, the woman will not be able to live after that. A notification from the system appears in front of the guy. Disong turns his head in the direction of Mom and asks her not to worry. On the sign it was written about the adaptation of the returned. The young man will receive a bonus as a reward, the release of basic skills. Disong reads the message and says that if they were going to give something like this, they should have done it faster. Various skills appear in front of the guy and after quickly learning them, he makes a choice. Two men enter the building with Jisoo. One of them hopes that Disong will not come here, and the man with the scar on his face replies that even if he comes, they still have the hostage. They enter the elevator and light flashes appear in the room. The man does not understand what is happening, but turning his head to the left, he notices Disong. The guy was wearing a black robe, and his eyes shone with a purple light. Seeing the young man, the bandit gets scared and asks what he is doing here. Disong grins and replies that he himself asked to bring money, so the young man is here. Of all the skills presented, the young man chose the Shadow Caster. When he clicked on the desired skill, a black liquid appeared in his hand, which was highlighted in blue. The young man summons a Shadow Caster, and the muck turns into the outline of a person. Disong tears a piece of cloth from his hoodie and orders the shadow to track this man by blood and open the way to him. Hands appear from the blue flame and take a piece of cloth. The second man attacks Disong's doppelganger. The guy dodges the blow and grabs the man by the face. Then the young man slams the man's head into the wall. Seeing this, the collector with the scar gets confused and asks Disong if he is awake. The doppelganger does not understand what the person is talking about, and when she heard about it, horror and panic appeared in Jisoo's eyes. The next minute, the elevator stops, and the man runs out of it with the words that their guest is awakened, so you need to deal with him. After these words, Disong strikes, and the man falls to the ground. People who are ready to attack the young man appear in the corridor. The guy quickly gets out of the elevator and the men try to attack the guy. They don't succeed because Disong is many times faster than them. The young man quickly defeats all opponents and after a few minutes they are lying on the floor unconscious. Disong goes into the elevator to his sister and, removing the tape from her mouth, asks about her well-being. The guy tells his sister to go home, and the girl asks why he doesn't go with her. The young man stops and replies that he needs to see something. The young man steps over the bodies of the men and goes on to his goal. After going further, Disong approaches the steps. He goes up and is noticed by other bandits. The guy scratches the back of his head and says that these people are like fleas. They only know how to chat and annoy people. The next second, one of the bandits flies out of the window of the building. A pumped-up man with a lot of tattoos is sitting in the bathhouse. The phone rings and he picks up the phone irritably. The man gets angry and reminds that he said not to bother him when he is steaming. The voice from the phone says that they have big problems, so the man needs to return to the office urgently. He becomes enraged, and his interlocutor adds that the matter is urgent and it is necessary to come as soon as possible. The man's eye starts twitching, and he squeezes the phone in his hand, which is why it crumbles into small pieces. In the office, the bodies of unconscious men lie in the corridors. There are numerous wounds on their bodies and their clothes are stained with blood. Disong enters the office, where a man, sitting on the floor and pressing against the table, is trembling with fear. The next second, the wall in the office crumbles and a man with tattoos appears from there. He grabs Disong by the head and presses him to the floor. The young man tears a piece of cloth from the man's jacket and manages to get out. The guy shakes off his hands and asks the man if he is awake. A sinister grin only appears on his face, and the man replies that there is no need to regret and he will send the young man to hell. The man's body is rapidly increasing and the jacket on his body is torn and pieces of fabric fly off in different directions. But before he can strike, he gets punched in the face. Disong says that if a man undresses, it will not hurt him less. After this blow, the bandit flies to the other end of the office. Disong walks up to the man and slams him into the wall with his foot. The young man says that the bandit knows nothing about hell. When a guy says that his family has suffered during his absence, a man thinks that this guy is from a completely different category and he needs to survive. The bandit stretches out his hand and asks Disong to stop. The man says he will give him anything, even money. Hearing about this, the young man asks where the money is. The bandit points his finger at the safe in the office. Disong turns his head towards the safe and walks towards it. When the young man turns away, the man gets up from the floor and runs away. The guy approaches the man who has been hiding behind the table all this time and was trembling with fear. Disong tells him that he will not leave now and will also get what he deserves. A tattooed thug sits in his car and promises himself to kill the whole family of this guy. Suddenly, he hears a familiar voice behind him. He says that the man forgot to say the code to the safe. After looking in the mirror and seeing Disong there, the bandit is horrified. Dark hands wrap around the bandit's face, and the young man says that what is important now is that he can know where the man is, and at any moment the guy can find him. The next moment, the bandit's car begins to shake. The screams of its owner can be heard from it. Disong is standing on the roof of a building and money is falling from a black portal to the ground. The young man goes down and after counting the money, thinks about how long you can live on 500,003,201. He smiles and wonders about buying an apartment in Seoul. After a while, Disong went to get a new phone. The store offered him a new model of a folding phone for 2,990,000 won. The young man picks up another pink phone and asks about it. The seller says that this is also a new model that is in good demand among girls. The man calls the price of the phone, 1,990,000 won. When a store employee noticed how the young man was thinking, the man thought that he was too persistent and decided to offer the customer an installment plan. But Disong decided to buy both of the proposed phones. The seller is happy about this and, having packed 2 phones, wishes the buyer a good day and thanks him for the purchase. The guy returns home and puts the shopping bag on the computer table. Mom calls her son to the table, and the young man replies that he needs to go out. A woman enters her son's room and asks where he is going. But when she enters the room, she sees that Disong was no longer there. It got dark outside, and Disong went to dinner with Young-ho. A guy walks into a restaurant, and a friend waves his hand, beckoning him to himself. The friends start drinking and having dinner, and Young-ho asks Disong if he has decided what he will do next. The young man replies that he does not know. Young-ho, in an attempt to reason with a friend, says that they are no longer stupid schoolchildren. Disong decides to ask a friend how many floors he can buy in a house for 500 million. Young-ho replies that for this amount you can find an apartment with such a deposit somewhere outside Seoul. Disong looks up at his friend in surprise and asks how much apartments in Seoul cost. Young-ho answers him that the average cost of an apartment reaches 2 billion won. The frustrated young man lowers his head, and Young-ho laughs. He says that the world changed a long time ago while the guy was in a coma. Disong drinks another shot, and Young-ho says that his mom told him that Disong woke up. The friend says that he will be able to answer this question only when he learns what awakening is. Young-ho laughs and remembers that Disong couldn't have known about it even if he woke up. After a while, the friends go outside and Young-ho lights up. He tells a friend that some time has passed since he fell into a coma, and then various portals began to appear. At first, the authorities ordered to investigate this unusual phenomenon. At one point, these portals began to crack and monsters began to appear from there. They started attacking people. Even the strongest weapons did not take them. So they realized that they were not affected by human weapons, and the number of victims increased each time. Disong asks about weapons, whether none really can kill a monster. Young-ho replies that it can be assumed that none of the weapons they are used to does not work on them. As time passed, they realized that they could only be affected by the aura weapon made from the biomaterial of the monsters themselves. But such weapons can only be used by the awakened, such as Disong, and Young-ho points at a friend with a cigarette between his fingers. The young man thinks about waking up and opens his smartphone to find information about it. Young-ho notices a friend's new phone and Disong replied that it was a new model. The guy grins and says that this model is outdated and now it can be taken for a song. Hearing these words, Disong gets very upset. Young-ho continues to talk about the abilities of the awakened. One of them is that they can strengthen their body through aura control, even without using weapons. The guy remembers that Disong quickly recovered his body and also that the young man recently beat the goons. Disong makes a thoughtful face and asks if money is paid if he becomes awakened. The friend is surprised by these words and asks if Disong is serious. The guy replies that he is not joking and asks how much you can earn on this. Their dialogue is interrupted by a sudden noise. Friends look up into the sky and see the portal that has opened. Monsters start coming out of there, and people around run for cover. A crowd of monsters is rapidly coming out of the portal. In the hands of the creatures hold bats, axes, and other various weapons. The screams of frightened people who tried to escape from the scene can be heard around. Disong and Young-ho don't understand why the portal has opened right now. Song noticed that these monsters were different from those in hell. The young man picks up a stone from the asphalt and decides to fight them. He launches a stone at one of the monsters, and Ho reminds them that no weapon will work on them now. The guy shrugs off the words of his friend, and the creature pays attention to Son and runs in his direction. The monster raises his weapon to strike, and Ho closes his eyes, resigned to the impending death. But this does not happen, because Song blows the monster's head off and says that they can be dealt with bare hands. Song continues to kill monsters, and Ho assumes that his friend has become awakened above level B when people's screams are heard behind him. Ho realizes that there is no time to think. Monsters sat on buildings and inspired people with fear and panic. When Ho saw this, he shouted that he knew a safe place and asked to follow him. People start following the guy, but monsters appear in front of them. Everyone freezes, realizing that they are all about to be killed. The creatures begin to rapidly attack people. They wound them and knock them down. In the crowd of people there was a little girl who, seeing a big monster in front of her, froze in place from fear. The monster raises a baton to strike, but Ho manages to save the child. He covers it with his body and falls to the ground. The next second, Song appears and kills this monster. Seeing a friend, Ho is very happy about his appearance. The young man continues to fight with the creatures, and Ho tells the people to move towards the riverbed as quickly as possible. Not far from the scene of the incident, a guy from a restaurant was conducting a live broadcast. He filmed Song fighting monsters alone. People wrote enthusiastic comments dedicated to the young man. At one point, the young man does not have time to react and is hit by one of the monsters. The kid from the restaurant started shouting for the young man to move faster, but these words do not help Song in any way. The creature hits the young man, and he flies away a few meters, crashing into the car. Meanwhile, Ho went down to the sewer to the rest of the people and returned the missing girl to her mother. Tears gathered in the woman's eyes, and she rushed to Haeun, asking for her forgiveness. The child was crying too, and the girl ran up to her mother to hug her. Ho was watching this scene with a smile on his face when one of the men asked him if he was really going to go back upstairs. Song is sitting on the ground near the car with his head down. Monsters approach him to make sure that the person is dead. The guy who conducted the live broadcast realized that the young man was in great danger, and the viewers of the broadcast had already buried Song. One of the monsters raises his hand with a weapon up and strikes. The kid from the restaurant closes his eyes with his palm so as not to witness someone's death. Raising his baton, the monster does not find a person there. Song flies up to the monster from behind and blows his head off. The guy who led the live broadcast screams to his viewers that young man survived. While Song continued to kill monsters, the audience began to complain that the shooting was being carried out too far from the scene. The guy refuses to come closer because he doesn't want to die. Suddenly, the guy receives a donation of 5 million won. A message was signed at the bottom that if the guy took a closer picture of Song, he would send another 5 million. The guy thinks about the amount of money he can earn for this broadcast, but he's scared. He doesn't understand how he can get closer and stay alive. Son is rapidly killing monsters, and the guy receives another transfer from another person again in 5 million with the message that he will be sent more money for taking off the face of the monster killer closer. Then another message comes saying that if the guy finds more information about Song, he will get even more money. The kid started receiving deposits from viewers, and one of them transferred 20 million won to the guy. The viewer offered another 40 million for filming Song's face and providing detailed information about him. They should communicate by notes. Two men are sitting in the office and watching the broadcast of the guy from the restaurant. One of them said that he did as the head ordered. First, the man transferred 20 million and then offered another 40. The other man smiled and said that now this guy will start moving. The man who was sitting at the computer replied that their people were also heading in that direction, so they would be able to grab him. Meanwhile, Song climbed onto the corpse of one of the monsters and looked extremely menacingly at the other creatures. They began to back away from fright. Suddenly, a monster appeared who killed another monster with a club. The streamer was sitting behind the car and, pointing the camera at Song, begged him to turn the young man in his direction. The number of monsters did not decrease, and Song realized that if this continued, his strength would completely run out. Suddenly, Ho appeared next to the kid who was conducting the broadcast. He reminded the young man about the evacuation and took him by the neck away from the car. Out of fright, the guy dropped the camera, and Ho continued to lead him away from the scene. When the young man realized that he would lose all his money, he tried to get out of Young Ho's hands, but it was useless. They ran for cover, but the monster blocked their way. Seeing the monster so close, the kid from the restaurant fainted and foam began to flow from his mouth. At the moment when the creature was about to kill two men, Disong flew up to them and killed the monster. The friends get to the nearest shelter and Disong asks Young Ho why he came back. The friend does not understand why the young man asked this question, so he replied that he was worried. Then Disong asks if Young Ho can stay alive. The young man explained that he needed to go to one place for 20 minutes. Young Ho replied that Disong should not worry, because the clans should come soon. A notification from the system appears in front of Disong, which said that the implementation update was 100% thanks to the murders in this world. Just below it was written that the young man could use the items of the pantheon in this world. The system asked if the guy was ready to enter the pantheon. When the young man agreed, a portal appeared in front of him. Young Ho saw it and his eyes widened in shock. He doesn't understand who Disong is since he can open portals. Disong enters the portal and finds himself in the pantheon. After entering there, he complains of pain in his body, although he has killed only a couple of monsters. Then the young man asks the system to show how much magic power he has left. A notification appears in front of the guy, which says that he has only 10% of his magical powers left. The young man scratches the back of his head and realizes that it wasn't about the weapon at all. He asks what is the fastest way to raise the level of magical powers. A message appears telling the young man to systematize his diary. Next, Disong will know the time and place of the task, and after completing it, he will receive a reward. After hearing about the diary, the young man remembers the notebook in which he made notes while he was in hell, so as not to go completely crazy. A notification appears in which the system asks if Disong wants to systematize the diary, and the young man confirms this action. A loading window appears on the table and his red diary appears in front of the guy. The system starts printing, and at this second, moments from his stay in hell pop up in Disong's head. When the seal is completed, Disong grabs his head because of the pain and asks to immediately go to the moment when he received magical powers, namely to page 16 in the forest with a predator. The system notifies about returning to page 16, being in hell for 5 years and 75 days. While Disong returns to the past, Young Ho and the kid from the restaurant climb the stairs. The streamer decides to ask the man about where the tough guy who defeated the monsters has gone. Young Ho quickly opened it and asked why he needed this information. The man realized that the young man was offered money for revealing Disong's face. Suddenly they hear a noise upstairs and Young Ho asks the kid to climb in silence, because there may still be surviving monsters upstairs. A man receives a message on his phone from the leader of the Soul Clan, Hwang Jujun. The message says that those responsible for the evacuation from the clan are late, referring to the fact that today is the weekend. After reading the message and putting the phone in his pocket, Young Ho mentally asks Disong to come back as soon as possible. Disong finds himself in the middle of a soulless desert. The system reports that the Predator's forest recorded on page 16 has been revived. It was signed from below that 3-dimensional seals interfere with reproducing the picture. When the young man noticed that the place he was in was too quiet, a notification with a new task appeared in front of him. It is necessary to destroy the celestial being that has captured the Predator's forest. The system has allocated 1 hour to complete this task. As a reward, Disong will receive a strengthening of magical powers. There will also be an additional reward. 2,000 points will be added to the total score. Disong hears a noise around him and a creature appears in the sky. The monster releases the laser from his eyes, but the young man manages to dodge the attack. The monster descends to the ground and starts attacking the guy from there. There was a fairly small distance between them and Disong decides to finish with this creature as soon as possible. The young man raises his hand and hits the opponent in the head. A crack appears on it and the monster falls to the ground. In the next second, the creature releases its claws from its hands. He buries them in the ground and rises with them. Calling his enemy annoying, the guy runs at him. The creature manages to get up from the ground, but Disong strikes, because of which the monster's body shatters into small pieces. The guy asks to continue and turning around, he notices a red ball. After that, fear can be seen in his eyes. Young Ho and the kid from the restaurant get to the roof of the building and, opening the door, see several corpses. The guy notices one man who is sitting on the ground and holding his stomach. They run up to the survivor and ask about his condition. The man starts making unintelligible noises and when Young Ho gets closer he hears the man telling them to run. Young-ho's body shivers and, turning around, he notices the monster. The monster's eyes are burning red, and an evil grin is visible on his face. The kid tells Young-ho to grab the injured man and they will run to the exit. But the man replies that it's too late. Young-ho forbids the young man to move until he says. The kid doesn't understand what's going on. The man tells the fellow and on his command to run to the door. The young man turns his head in fright towards the door and waits for the command. When the monster starts growling and heading towards the people, Young-ho gives the command to the young man. Meanwhile, in the predator's forest, the red ball increases several times and Disong does not understand what is happening. The item informs about the beginning of rebirth and the body of the slain monster begins to recover. Eason rushes to the side of the ball with all his legs and strikes at it. After that, the percentage of rebirth drops from 10% to 3%. The young man hits his feet on the ball and performing a backflip, lands on the object. The percentage of rebirth is growing rapidly, and Disong continues to strike. At some point, silhouettes of the same monsters can be seen from behind the clouds. The creatures attack the guy with lasers from the eyes and he has to jump to the ground. 2% remains until the end of the rebirth, and Disong realizes that in this way he cannot defeat the enemy, so he decides to find the answer in his memory. The young man leans his hand against his head and starts sorting through his memories. His thoughts are in a complete mess, so it is difficult for him to find the right solution. The guy still manages to find the right memory in his brain. Young-ho tells the kid to run to the door, and they rush as fast as they can to the exit. While the monster flies over them, the guys manage to reach the door and hide from the creature. The monster comes to the door and thrusts his hand into the doorway, trying to grope people. When the hand disappears, Young-ho suggests that the young man go down. Meanwhile, chaos reigns in the pantheon. 3 monsters attack Disong, releasing their claws from their hands. The young man successfully flies past them and thinks that there is very little left. The guy gets to the trees and, pushing off from the tree, lands on the territory of the predator's forest. Monsters begin to determine the radius of the object's location and are going to attack, but it's too late. A huge creature appears from the ground, which quickly eats the celestial being. Disong makes sure that the swamp whale still has the same appetite and will digest anything. A notification about the completion of the task appears again in front of the young man. Next, the reboot of Han Disong's physical abilities begins. His body begins to light up, and the young man is convinced that there is really more power. The guy gets a bonus for completing the mission, the judge's dagger. Then a sign with information about the item appears. It is a holy object with which the heavenly judges punish their enemies. Also, it is a holy object made by peeling the epidermis from a golem. The stronger the owner, the stronger the weapon becomes. This dagger can be controlled remotely, so the young man launches the weapon into the sky. After flying a short distance, the dagger returns to the owner's hands. Disong decides to return to Earth and a portal opens in front of him. The news anchor talks about the latest events. Recently, there was another opening of portals near Nangokden, and the area was subjected to chaos. A man cannot hide his emotions, because it seems that the situation that happened in Daegu is repeating itself. The presenter asks the professor what his observations on this incident are. The man replies that, firstly, the problem is that this area is managed by the Association of Hunters. He does not understand how people can trust people who are sluggish with the problem, so they also allow themselves days off. Portals are open periodically, which means that you need to be alert on any weekend or holidays. In this case, the association should be held accountable, the presenter adds. 2 men from the Hunters Association are driving in the car. They watch the news and one of them is extremely outraged by what is being broadcast on the news. The man says that hunters from the association cannot receive as much as members of the clan. He is angry at the current situation because they cannot catch him even with the help of special equipment. A man in a suit is sitting in the next seat and asks the other to shut up. In any case, he does not know about them, but he, as a leader, will definitely be fired if they fail. From the guy's phone comes an urgent announcement that a dubious guard with injuries has now appeared in Nangokden. Young-ho and the streamer are hiding from the monster in a nearby restaurant. The kid asks the older one if there is no way to get out of here. It's creepy for him to be here when he remembers the man who died on the roof. Young-ho replies that he is also scared, but they have no other way out, they can only wait for rescuers. There is a crash outside, and the young man looks out from behind the table to find out what these sounds are. The guys mistook this noise for rescuers, but the next second an unknown person breaks through the wall, and Young-ho thinks they are monsters. The headless body of the monster falls into the restaurant, and with it Disong. Seeing a friend, Young-ho rejoices at his appearance. The young man smiles and asks if he is late. Young-ho asks Disong how he got here. The young man folds his arms on his chest and a grimace of pain appears on his face. A friend asks if D-Song got hurt. The guy ignores his words and turns to the streamer. He asks the kid to turn on the fire to fry some meat. They are both surprised by this request, because now is not the right time and place to eat. In this restaurant lies the headless corpse of a monster. D-Song replies that there is nothing wrong with that. The young man roasts his meat and while he eats, Young-ho and the streamer press their hands to their mouths in disgust. A man in a camouflage uniform enters the restaurant and says that there is a survivor here. The military sees a dead monster and 3 people. The boy begins to rejoice that they are alive and rushes to thank the man. The rescuer pays attention to the guy who ate meat. He doesn't understand how the young man manages to eat in such a situation. Jeon-ho wishes health by putting his palm to his forehead and thanks the man for the work done in such a deep night. He was worried that he couldn't find shelter in time. Noticing a strange expression on the military man's face, Young-ho approaches D-Song and explains that this guy is very shocked, so he behaves strangely. The military apologizes and says that they can't just leave. Realizing what the man is talking about, Young-ho takes out a business card that says that he is from the Seoul clan and is the head of Team 1. Seeing the business card, the man's face relaxes and he replies that he will see them off and asks them to follow him. A hunter from the association and a supervisor arrive at the scene. Corpses are scattered everywhere on the street, and the military is studying the situation. While the manager is inspecting the street, the hunter, leaning against the car, cleansed his stomach. It was unpleasant for him to see this picture. The leader shouts that now is not the right time for this activity, and sends a hunter to check the survivors. The guy apologizes and goes to one of the military. It is provided by a hunter from the association and offers to go inside together. The friends are driving in the car and Young-ho, who was driving, offers D-Song to spend the night with him today. D-Song refuses, saying that they are worried about him at home. Young-ho replies that it would be good if everything turned out to be excitement. Now everyone wants to catch D-Song. Young-ho says he will call his friend's mom himself, and while they are going to his place, they will take a shower and eat fried chicken there. D-Song walks into a friend's house and enthusiastically inspects the apartment. Young-ho sends a friend to wash, and he orders chicken. D-Song comes out of the shower and sees various food on the table. He is surprised by this gesture, and Young-ho says that his friend was never able to eat properly last time. D-Song reminds a friend of his words that if you become a hunter, you can earn money. Young-ho replies that now is the time when such people are appreciated. He also asks if D-Song is going to work as a hunter. The young man responds positively. Young-ho supports his friend's decision and says that if D-Song goes to the association and shows his abilities, he will definitely get a B level. And if he tries, maybe he will be able to get an A level. Jeon-ho guarantees it. D-Song decides to ask what levels the friend is talking about. Young-ho explains that it's like ranks. If he is at level B, he will be able to join a large clan, or become a member of the association. In any case, the salary will be serious, and at a level many times more. Then D-Song asks if there are levels higher. Jeong-ho replies that there is. There is a level S and there are only 5 such people out of 2 million awakened. Young-ho chuckles and asks a friend if he is going to become the 6th. The guy says that you don't need to have such ambitions. It would be good if Dasan was taken at least, and it's not so easy to get into level A in Korea. Young-ho asks his friend again to make sure of his words whether D-Song is really going to become a hunter. The young man nods his head. Then Young-ho asks to leave this matter to him, and they hit cans of beer, wishing each other great success. 2 men are sitting in a restaurant and one of them is having dinner while the other is trembling with fear. Next to the long-haired man is a photo of D-Song, and he points at it with a knife. He says that this crazy debtor destroyed their entire organization. The man sitting opposite agrees with his words. Lee Sagu is the leader of the Red Square clan. He wipes the corners of his lips with a white napkin and says that they are in a difficult situation. Lee Sagu gets up from his chair and continues, saying that if they were alive, they could have escaped. The man does not understand why they came to him and told him about it. Lee Sagu walks up to the man and puts her hands on his shoulders. The bandit begins to tremble even more with fear, and he says that they had nowhere else to turn. Lee Sagu replies that there was nothing else for him to do, because the bandit can't report to the police. However, Lee Sug doesn't understand why his interlocutor is trembling so much. Then he understands what's going on and asks if he's acting like this because of that bandit. Lee Sagu nods his head towards the dead bandit, under which there was a large pool of blood. Tears begin to accumulate in the man's eyes, and he begs Lee Soga to spare his life. The young man replies that he should not worry, because they are going to take only money. No matter how they were robbed, they probably still have hidden savings. The bandit replies that he held the lowest position, so he doesn't know anything about it. The man cries and asks to believe him. Lee Sagu puts his hand on the bandit's head and decides to believe him. The bandit does not believe his ears and thanks the head for it. In the next second, Sagu says that they will finish on this and the bandit's head shatters into pieces. Sagu walks away from the table and picks up a photo of Disung, orders him to deal with it. Disung approaches the building of the Hunters Association of Korea. Jeong Ho, who gave him a ride, says that first Disung will need to go inside and tell the employee at the entrance that he has come to receive a certificate of his awakening. Then they'll tell him everything. Disung nods to his friend and starts to leave. Jeong Ho shouts after him so that he does not forget to use polite speech. At the end, the friend adds that he will go to work while Disung is busy and asks him to write to him when the results come. The young man comes closer to the building and notices a large number of people at the entrance, who also came here to get a certificate. Dasan was sitting in the corridor outside the examination room. Sitting in line and looking down at the ticket, the young man realized that hunters are quite a sought-after position. He hopes that they will reach number 9 quickly. A message from his mother comes to the young man's phone. She asked him if he was still at Chang Ho's. The woman warned her son that her back ached and she took a day off at work. Disung decided that it was better for his mom not to know what he was going to do. Therefore, he answers that he is still at Young Ho. He wanted to take a shower slowly and go home. In response, a message comes asking if Disung has eaten. If not, then let him come home. Jisoo wanted to have lunch together and went to get soup, mom writes. The young man smiles, looking at the phone screen and wants to return home as soon as possible. A girl comes out of the ward and informs that the 9th number is next in line, so you need to be ready. The young man looks down at the piece of paper with the number and hears the screams of his grandfather. The man was arguing with the employee, convincing him that he was awake, because he definitely felt that this had happened to him. The employee tries to explain to the man that if the drug does not recognize this, then the person is not awake. But the grandfather does not hear the young man. He shifts the blame to the drug, saying that it is defective. People in the queue are getting angry, because it has become too noisy in the corridor because of Grandpa's screams. The man points his finger at his head and says that he is definitely awake, because almost all his hair fell out during the night. After hearing this, the visitors start laughing, and Dasan is angry about this situation, because he has a delicious soup waiting for him at home. When Grandpa starts threatening the employee that he will go to the boss and report everything, Dasan approaches him from behind. The young man puts his hand on the man's head and reminds him that people in the corridor are waiting for their turn. The grandfather faded away and lowering the tone of his voice says that they have worthless equipment, because he is definitely awakened. When a young man asks an employee if the device is really broken, a man approaches them and says that he can check its performance, because he is awakened. He goes to the machine and puts his hand to the ball, which lights up green, which indicates that the man has a C level. After that, the girl asks the man to get out, because there is a queue in the corridor, and the grandfather does not calm down and says that the device may be wrong. The employee apologizes to Disung for the incident and invites him in. When the young man walks away from the staff, the girl whispers to her son-in-law that this guy is likely to have a high level. The man grins and snapping his fingers on the girl's forehead tells her to work, not to make eyes. The worker recalls that at the moment when Disung approached his grandfather, the young man caused her a feeling of fear. Therefore, she concludes that if the young man is awakened, then he will definitely be above level B. A phone call rings in the office of the branch manager. The man picks up the phone and asks what happened. The voice on the phone asks the head to go down to the 6th floor in the 3rd ward. The man does not understand why he needs to go down there, and the voice replies that it is better for him to see it for himself. A man rides in an elevator and thinks that someone with an S level has appeared. But the head quickly discards these thoughts from his head, deciding that, as usual, one of the subjects is brawling. People gathered near the 3rd ward, who were watching what was happening. The head pushes people aside and goes into the ward. Entering the office, the man sees that glass balls are broken on the apparatus for checking the level of awakened ones. A guy approaches the manager and explains that when Dasan approached the device started flashing different colors. This happened for the first time. A little earlier, when Disung put his hand to the device, the ball lit up with various colors. Seeing this, the young man asked the employee if this should be the case. The man replied that this sometimes happens, and at that moment the glass balls cracked and smoke filled the ward. The manager asks his employees if there was a malfunction of the devices. The employee replied that they had checked 3 devices, and they all reacted in a similar way. The manager replied that all these devices could not be broken. Hearing the conversation of the men, Dasan hoped inside that they would not demand monetary compensation from the young man. The guy decides to ask what he should do now and whether he needs to wait for the results to appear. The manager thought that if they continue to test it in this way, then they will only break the rest of the devices. The man clears his throat and tells Han Disong that this is the first time they have encountered such a situation, so the decision should be made by the border guards. Disong doesn't understand who the man is talking about. He explains that in a situation where the apparatus cannot be determined, the judges conduct a licensing test, and based on its results, they identify the level. The young man asks if this test will be fair. He is told that the assessment will take place according to the established criteria, so the young man cannot worry about this. The young man accepts this outcome of events and, after saying goodbye to the employees of the association, leaves. The head wipes the beads of sweat from his forehead with the words that they cannot live in peace. The worker approaches the man and asks him about the fact that the crystal ball reacts to foreign energy in the body of the awakened. The supervisor confirms her words, and the girl assumes that Han Disong's energy has exceeded the scale that the ball can withstand. After all, it is possible that the balloon exploded for this reason. Upon hearing this, one of the employees laughs into his fist and, catching the girl's gaze on him, apologizes. The manager believes that the girl's assumption is nonsense, because judging by her words, Han Disong is above the S level. The employee replies that there is such a possibility. The man answers her so that she thinks before she speaks. There's a lot of fiction going on in the world right now, but Disong can't be a god if you rely on the girl's words. The young man returns home and decides to call his friend Young-ho. He asks about the results of the inspection, and Dasan replies that he was sent to the border guards. After hearing about the border guards, Jong-ho assumes that the device failed, but the young man denies his words. Then Young-ho asks what happened. Dasan replies to a friend that the device is broken. After hearing about this, Young-ho hoped that his friend had not made a scandal there, but Disong again answers in the negative. A classmate decides to clarify the order of Han Disong's actions. He asks that after the young man put his hand on the device, as he was told, it broke down. Disong finally gives a positive answer. Young-ho replies that his friend is full of surprises. He is also confident that Disong will pass the test and get a high level. Sensing something strange, the young man stops and replies that he doesn't care. The friend finally says that later he will send the date of the test and all the information about it to Disong. After saying goodbye to a friend and completing the call, the young man turns back and sees a house that was under construction. Disong looks closely and sees a man on the top floor who is aiming a firearm at him. The girl thinks that no matter how you look, the young man does not look so strong. But she doesn't care how strong he is, one shot will solve everything. When the girl points the sight at Disong, the young man slowly turned his head in her direction and pointing his fingers at the head said that she should shoot at this place. The killer did not expect that she was discovered, because this has never happened to her. The killer straightens up and wonders how the guy can hear her voice from such a distance. When the girl decides to hide, Disong tells her to shoot again. Hearing this, the girl sits down again and shoots the young man. The girl hits the target and smoke appears around the guy. When it dissipates, she sees that the young man was completely unharmed. He continued to stand still. The blonde does not believe in what is happening, because it was not a simple cartridge, but an aura bullet. The girl looks at the guy to understand who he is. After a second, she tells herself to pack up and get out of here first. The killer leaves the weapon and runs away as fast as he can. But she does not have time to do this. Her leg is wounded by Disong's dagger and she falls to the floor. The next moment she sees her victim in front of her. A smile appears on his face and the young man regrets that the girl did not aim well, but even so she will not be able to kill him. The girl pulls out a gun from behind her back and points it at Disong. The blonde asks why he stayed alive after the aura weapon and where he came from. The guy replies that he is Han Disong, returned from hell. The killer loses his temper and says that everything said is nonsense. This guy was a real monster in her eyes. The girl starts shooting at the young man, but he is unshakable. When the cartridges in the pistol run out and a cloud of smoke forms in the place where she shot, the girl asks aloud to herself whether Disong has died. Suddenly, a young man's voice is heard behind her. The girl is confused because she saw him fall. The guy grabs the blonde by the neck and presses her against the wall. She tries to get out of the trap, but black silhouettes with red eyes appear behind her, laughing ominously. When the girl loses consciousness, the young man looks at her and thinks that he did not even emit his poison. and the blonde is already unconscious. Deeson collects bullets from the floor and pays attention to the guitar case. The young man approaches him and sees his photo there, as well as pictures of his sister and mother. The killer wakes up and starts screaming. She is pressed against the wall by dark, blurry hands that do not allow the girl to escape. The young man approaches her and tells her to answer his questions. If he says too much or talks nonsense, then Deeson will kill him. The young man asks the girl about who sent her. After hearing this, the killer realizes that not a single word about the Red Horse clan can slip through. Then she remembers one person who is listed as missing. If the girl gives him a tip, then Deeson will not suspect anything. The girl calls her name Kim Sohun. Hearing this name, the young man asks who it is. The blonde replies that this is the bully whom Deeson recently robbed and even took money from the safe. The young man remembers about 500 million, and the girl rejoices and decides that first she needs to get out of here. The blonde confirms his words about the named amount and says that if Deeson lets her go, she will tell about where this person is. In the next second, the young man releases an attack from his hands, which punches a hole in the girl's shoulder. A girl screams, and she asks why she got hit, because she told everything. Deeson replied that she was too kind for a mercenary. The young man repeats that if the blonde starts talking nonsense again, he will kill her. The girl realizes that she was too hasty and now does not know what to do. The guy again asks his question, who sent her? The girl realizes that she has already failed the task. Even if she managed to get out of here alive, the man from the Red Horse clan would kill her. Wherever she goes, the result will be the same. The blonde puts her hand to her chest. The area around her lights up with a purple light. She says that no matter how much the young man asks her, the answer will still be the same. This behavior infuriates Deeson, so putting two fingers in front of him in the form of a pistol, the guy kills the killer. Deeson is angry that he has not found out who sent the girl, and, on top of everything else, he will have to clean up the corpse. The young man puts his hand to his head and starts reading the diary. Having named the keyword, the memory of the deceased, the guy begins to search for information. Having found the right page, the young man opens a portal to the pantheon. He understands that there are already enough portals open, but it will be better if he finds out something. Once in the pantheon, the system welcomes Han Deeson. Then the following notification appears with a question about what date and place the young man would like to visit. Deeson names page 134, which is written about the imprisonment of the soul. Soul imprisonment is the main royal weapon, along with the Demon King, one of the 15 main forces of hell. This is an artifact that connects with the deceased through blood. Initially, Deeson thought that with the help of soul imprisonment, he would be able to fight comfortably, but the one with whom he associated himself turned out to be too weak. A message appears in front of the young man, in which a page, years and days were written, namely 134 pages of 67 years and 198 days. A little below was written the question of whether the young man wants to return to the pantheon. Deeson understands that the situation is different on Earth, so this time he uses it properly. The young man confirms the action and takes him to page 34 in a place called Ghost River. Once on the spot, the young man examines the area and realizes that on the other side of this river is the territory of the king. There used to be a boat there and a young man could cross the river, but now there was no boat, not even trees, and it was impossible to swim across. Putting a body in a river would mean destroying it with the dead. Suddenly, a notification appears from the system, on which information about a new task is written. It is necessary to destroy the celestial beings that capture the river in 30 minutes. The enemies discover an unidentified intruder in the form of Deeson and are going to attack. While the creatures are waiting for approval for destruction, the young man raises his eyes to the sky and monsters with purple eyes. Then a notification appears on which the origin of the White Lord was told. This is a mechanical structure that operates independently. The monsters get permission to destroy and start attacking. In the hope that the young man will be given a boat for winning this task, he runs to the opponents, pulling out his dagger. Deeson quickly runs past the attacks of mechanical creatures. The strongest of all the monsters present releases small purple bombs from its trunk, but Deeson manages to react and runs away from the blows in time. Then the guy runs up to the largest creature and inserting a dagger into the belly runs along the monster, thereby killing the monster. The monster falls to the ground, and attacks in the form of purple bombs begin to fly from the sky to the young man. The guy lands on the ground to prepare for further combat.